Committee will come to order. The chair notes the presence of a quorum. Pursuant to committee rules, members of the committee may submit written opening statements for the record. I ask that members may revise and extend their remarks on the bills to be considered at this markup and have those remarks included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the committee at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 3I, the chair announces that he may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote is ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Welcome to our first markup of the 119th Congress. During our committee's organizing meeting, I said that we must increase access to our public lands and natural resources, managing them well, facilitating economic development for local communities, and expanding recreational opportunities for all Americans. And we have worked hard on that charge since the first day of Congress. In fact, while today is our first legislative markup, I'm proud to report that this committee has already succeeded in moving 16 bills off the House floor. Our constituents elected each of us to advance sound policy through the legislative process, and I'm excited to continue doing just that. The legislation under consideration improves communities' access to water resources, promotes access to affordable and reliable energy, and encourages sound land management practices to safeguard communities against catastrophic wildfire. To name a few, H.R. 302, the Water Rights Protection Act of 2025 by our colleague Representative Maloy, addresses a long-standing source of conflict in the West, water rights. The bill provides a legislative fix to prevent the federal government from seizing privately owned waters. H.R. 231, the Colorado River Basin System Conservation Extension Act of 2025 by Representative Hageman, reauthorizes a critical program under the Bureau of Reclamation that reduces consumptive use of water resources in the Colorado River Basin by more than 22,000 acre-feet. Her second bill on the markup, H.R. 1001, that among other things requires the Western Area Power Administration to enter a memorandum of understanding to address the impacts of flow experiments at Glen Canyon Dam on the upper Colorado River Basin. H.R. 331 by Representative Fulcher amends the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act to allow holders of an existing right-of-way to use existing infrastructure to facilitate aquifer recharge. H.R. 1044 by Representative Valadeo authorizes the Secretary of the Interior to extend the Cahuilla project permit for up to an additional 40 years, allowing the project to continue supplying reliable and affordable hydroelectric power to the region. H.R. 1110 by our colleague Representative LaMalfa requires the Secretary of Agriculture to develop a strategy to increase livestock grazing as a means of reducing wildfire risk. We will also be marking up our committee's authorization and oversight plan for the 119th Congress, which we must do under Clause 2D1 of House Rule 10 by March 1st. Last Congress, our committee held 87 oversight hearings addressing critical issues like China's growing malign influence in the Indo-Pacific and the international criminal cartels targeting Indian communities with the illegal drugs trafficked across our borders. Our committee has not missed a beat in the 119th Congress with its oversight work. In addition to the hearings we have conducted on our nation's critical mineral and energy supply chains, this afternoon our Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee will examine the Bureau of Indian Education. The hearing will focus on how the agency's mismanagement has had devastating impacts on the quality of education and the opportunities available to some of the most vulnerable children in Indian country. These are the kind of real-world issues our constituents elected us to investigate and address through oversight and legislation in this committee. I'm proud of the legislative oversight work this committee has completed during my tenure as chairman. I'm excited for the work we will do in the 119th Congress and humbled by the trust placed in each of us by our constituents to address the issues most important to them, their families, and their communities. With that, I yield back, and I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I am glad to join you at the first markup of legislation for the 119th Congress. Our staffs have worked together to reach agreement on most of the bills that we'll consider today, and I appreciate that collaboration. But I can't help but wonder if what we're doing today will even matter, because it ignores a very large elephant in the room. Right now, the administration is illegally blocking funds enacted by Congress to help hardworking Americans, including funding meant for wildfire management and water infrastructure projects at a time when communities in California are still reeling from disaster and other communities are hoping to avoid the next disaster. Are we considering measures related to these egregious abuses of power today? No. The administration has illegally fired inspectors general from at least 18 federal agencies, including the Department of Interior, without warning, without explanation, in clear violation of the law. But are we gathering today to advance legislation to force the White House to follow the law and reinstate these independent watchdogs? We are not. Elon Musk and his Doge tech bros are ransacking federal agencies, accessing America's private data, and purporting to fire people and shut down entire programs. It appears that NOAA is next on the chopping block, a science-based agency that provides critical weather data, life-saving storm warnings, maritime safety, among other massively important functions. Gutting NOAA, the way Doge is attempting to do with so many other agencies, will literally put lives at risk. But are we taking action today to safeguard this essential agency? Nope. Our Republican colleagues don't even want to talk about it. Today, this committee will not be advancing any legislation to respond to the Trump administration's actions at all. Not their illegal actions to freeze funding for wildfire resiliency, not their wasting of billions of gallons of precious water in California for a photo op, and not their illegal purge of federal workers. Today, this committee will not be taking up any bills to meaningfully address the actual cost of energy for everyday Americans or to combat the climate crisis that is harming Americans. Instead, Republicans are burying their heads in the sand and doing essentially housekeeping tasks today. The main agenda item is marking up their Authorization and Oversight Plan, which is a glorified press release. Despite its name, it does nothing to oversee the actual abuses of power happening right now down the street. They're acting like everything is fine, just business as usual, as if none of these crises are happening. But let me assure the American people, this lawlessness, this chaos and calamity, this total abdication of Congress's oversight role and its Article I power, this is not normal, and it is not acceptable. I'll save most of my comments about the so-called oversight plan that we're marking up for debate, but here's a little preview. Committee Republicans will lay out their priorities, like pursuing a dirty drilling agenda to increase U.S. oil production because it's never enough, even though we're currently at record-breaking levels. This Valentine to big oil will do nothing to help hardworking families meet the costs of their energy bills. It'll do nothing to protect clean air and clean water, and obviously it does nothing for the climate crisis except to make it worse. The focus of this oversight plan really speaks to either an inability or just a flat-out refusal to ever question, scrutinize, or hold this administration accountable. It is a complete surrender of the clean energy economy, which is the future, to our adversaries around the world. It is a refusal to investigate the smoking gun evidence of big oil illegally colluding with OPEC to use our public lands, the American people's lands, to gouge prices for American consumers. Welcome to the first markup of the second Trump regime. Team Extreme's Valentine to big oil and a pledge of allegiance to a lawless wannabe king. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to the markup notice, it is now in order to consider H.R. 302, Water Rights Protection Act of 2025. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized for purpose of debate on the bill? Does any member wish to be recognized for purpose of the debate on the bill? Ms. Maloy.
That's your
Yes.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Sorry, I was drawing a Valentine to big oil and I got myself distracted. This is an important bill for Utah because we have so much public land, and we have a history of land management agencies requiring co-ownership of water rights in order to issue permits, and water rights are firmly in the jurisdiction of the state. So this is just to clear that up, make sure we don't have that problem. It matters a lot in my state and in our neighboring states. And I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is not the first or even the second time that we've seen this legislation, and I have to say, it is not getting better with the passage of time. For more than a decade, it's been reintroduced every Congress as a bumper sticker messaging bill for some Republicans. And, you know, instead of grappling with the complex realities of our nation's water system, which includes federal water rights for tribes, national parks, and more, this legislation just tries to reduce these to some level of simplicity that doesn't work. It sidesteps these complexities, and it tries to pass off itself as a muddled states' rights messaging bill rather than a serious policy effort. If this was enacted, it would ostensibly elevate state water rights above all others, implicitly overriding long-established federal water rights that exist for tribes and to preserve the existence of federal reservations like our national parks. There's one thing that's changed, though. When this bill was first introduced in 2013, it didn't include any savings clause. The bill triggered major opposition from a lot of stakeholders who were rightly worried about its actual implications. And so later versions of the bill have started adding savings clauses to try to clean up the problems, try to paper over the sweeping implications for so many people, including tribes, the hunting and fishing community, recreationists, and Americans who enjoy our national parks and public lands. And now fast forward 12 years, here we are again debating the same bill, which is now bloated with 7 savings clauses, each one an attempt to patch over the fundamental problems at its core. And you can't help but thinking about the children's nursery rhyme about the little old lady who swallowed a fly. And on it went, trying to fix the original problem of swallowing the fly. Since we're debating this bill again, let's go back to where it all began. The original bill was introduced after a narrow dispute between the Forest Service and the National Ski Areas Association. The dispute was over an interim directive that would have required ski areas operating on Forest Service land to transfer their water rights to the United States. The Forest Service's concern was just pretty straightforward. If ski resorts sold off increasingly valuable water rights, the Forest Service could be left high and dry, literally without water for any future ski area operators to do things like snowmaking and to meet other essential needs. Now, ultimately, the Forest Service revised its approach. Their final directive simply required ski areas to provide assurances that enough water would remain with the ski area permit for snowmaking and other essential operations. Totally sensible solution, and it was received well by the industry that originally challenged that interim decision. This should have been the end of it, but instead, my colleagues have kept pushing this bill forward, extending it beyond its original context, writing it so broadly that it would have all of these far-reaching consequences for water management across the country if it ever became law, which it won't. Just last Congress, the Interior Department stated for the record that this legislation, quote, would jeopardize the department's ability to protect the lands and resources that it is entrusted to manage on behalf of the American people and the tribes to whom we owe a trust responsibility. So this is not a minor issue. It's a clear warning. This bill would actively undermine the department's ability to protect tribal water rights and to manage our public lands for the benefit of all Americans. But the sponsors still insist this legislation is about providing reasonable protections for states' rights in water management. If this is truly the case, why does the bill need so many savings clauses, more and more with each new version? Here's the reality. You can't gut federal water rights for tribes and our national parks and then suddenly save them with a clause at the end that is in direct conflict with the rest of the bill. It is the little old lady who swallowed the fly. If a bill this short needs 7 savings clauses to try to avoid harming existing rights, federal authority, or environmental protections, its proponents should probably go back to the drafting table. But if history is any guide, We're going to keep seeing this bill, maybe with an 8th savings clause in the next Congress, along with another reminder that this states' rights bill isn't built to pass. It's designed to keep the same tired talking points alive. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Kennedy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm honored to be here with this distinguished committee, and thank you for the time. We have a variety of great bills being considered today, and it heartens me to see the bipartisan work being done. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, including the ranking member, Mr. Huffman, to further my own legislative items as this Congress moves forward. I'd like to offer my support to Representative Maloy's bill, H.R. 302, the Water Rights Protection Act of 2025. This legislation, which I proudly co-sponsor, will protect the state's ability to choose how their water is allocated and used, and for that, with the historical referencing associated with this bill, the states made the federal government. I'll remind those that are listening, the federal government did not make the states. Water rights have always been a state prerogative, and we as a legislative body ought to stand firmly behind the states' rights to direct the water, which is fundamental to society. Also, as a doctor, remind this body that our own bodies, 60% of our bodies are water. Water is fundamental to life. In fact, the only thing more important to our bodies is oxygen, which is also fundamental to life. But the water rights that our states are able to exercise are fundamental to not only our own capacity to live and move and activate the capacity we have to live this life, it's also fundamental to our ranchers, our farmers, and business owners. And they can't plan for their futures if they can't plan for the water rights that should be exercised on a state level, not on a federal level. I'd like to thank Representative Maloy for leading on this effort to protect Utahns and our country's citizens' peace of mind as water rights across the West are protected. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the legislation? Mr. Amodei, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's ironic that we're sitting here just in this meeting where we're talking about executive overreach, but at the same time, it's okay if it's by a different administration 10 years ago, and if it's the Forest Service, which has been that bastion of administrative policy over the last 15 years with everything, and let's not leave out the Corps of Engineers and whatever. But as I look around this committee and I look at people who represent districts in states that are not in the Great Basin, and as I'm the only member of this committee who represents a state that is about 85% owned by the federal government, and to be honest with you, that's not necessarily evil in and of itself, but in the case of my state, the only stick we have in the game is you have to go to the state engineer for water rights. That's whether you're the federal government, that's whether you're a private entity, that's where you're an indigenous nation or anything like that. And by the way, that's been working well for over 100 years. Tribes are not treated any different than anybody else. Private landowners aren't treated any different than anybody else. And in fact, our state has a statute in its laws that says if you're the federal government, you can't own water rights unless you are doing things like stock watering, raising, doing stuff. You can't just own it as the federal government and then hold it as whatever. That's it. The only check we have on federal planning and zoning authority for 85% of the acreage in our state. So when I look at and hear them, well, 40% of our state is federally owned. Well, why don't you double that and see how much you like somebody in an administration that says the Forest Service wants to be able to manage. The ski resorts are doing fine. They have their own water rights. And by the way, the state engineer has never let them say, we're going to let you sell the water rights off that mountainside so that you can't make snow anymore for that. There's a whole NEPA type process that goes on. So frankly, in order to keep this from something that is at the whim of whatever the administration is, and Big Brother's okay as long as he is your big brother or she is your big sister. I get that. But it's like this ought not to basically disenfranchise those western states who have vast majorities of their acreage that are owned and controlled by the federal government. They don't need control of the water too. You have very responsible state engineers' offices that do that in a public, transparent manner and are a lot less affected by who the administration is and what their policy is at the DC level. And I will just finish by saying this. In each one of our districts, when you talk about control over something as important as that, I'm not sure anybody here would like going, I want people from 49 other states making decisions which impact responsible land use planning and resource planning in my state. I strongly support Ms. Maloy's bill. Thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose H.R. 302. Although tribes often hold the most senior water rights, many Native communities still lack access to clean, reliable water, and a significant portion of tribal water rights remain undeveloped and unprotected. The federal government has a clear legal obligation to protect these rights, as further framed under the Winters Doctrine, which has long ensured tribes the right to the water necessary for the fulfillment of their needs, independent of state control. While tribes can and do seek legal recourse to quantify and enforce their water rights, many prefer to negotiate these rights through settlements rather than endure lengthy, divisive, and costly litigation. Negotiated water rights settlements allow tribes, states, the federal government, and other water users to resolve competing claims in a more efficient manner. These settlements provide tribes with the resources necessary to bring clean water to their communities while reducing legal, financial, and water supply uncertainties for all parties involved. Indian water rights settlements are crucial for resolving water disputes in a way that upholds the important tribal sovereignty. While the legislation before us today includes a vague one-sentence savings clause in an attempt to protect tribal water rights, the underlying text ultimately limits the federal government's ability to assure and enforce these rights. Section 3 of the bill is overly broad and could be interpreted to constrain the Secretary of the Interior's authority to approve or participate in water settlements, contrary to the United States' long-standing support for such settlements. By restricting the Secretary's role in negotiating water settlements, this legislation would weaken the federal government's ability to safeguard tribal water rights, offering a false sense of security while making it more difficult for tribes to secure clean, reliable water and undermining their sovereignty. Tribal communities already face considerable hurdles in securing access to clean water, and this bill will only deepen these challenges. By restricting federal authority, diminishing protections, and increasing the likelihood of disputes between tribes, states, and industries, H.R. 302 will undermine tribal water rights. I urge my colleagues to vote against this bill to protect tribal water rights by upholding the Winters Doctrine, ensuring that tribes have the legal and necessary support to secure clean water for future generations. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Hernandez, yields back.
Chairman,
Is there
Mr.
further?
Chairman.
Mr. Fulcher, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield some time to my colleague from Utah, Congressman Maloy.
Thank you, Mr. Fulcher. I just want to quickly clarify that this bill doesn't impact the Winters Doctrine. It doesn't impact Native water rights. It doesn't impact Bureau of Rec contracts, Endangered Species Act, reserved water rights, Federal Powers Act, or any interstate water compacts. I think the more applicable nursery rhyme would be Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, but Jack has jurisdiction over the hill and Jill has jurisdiction over the water, and we just need to keep that clear and separate. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? I recognize myself. I speak in support of Representative Maloy's common sense legislation, the Water Rights Protection Act, which would ensure that the Department of the Interior and the Department of Agriculture cannot impose greater restrictions on regulatory requirements on a water right than is allowed by applicable state laws. It was once said that in the West, water is for fighting. In fact, disputes between states and the federal government over water rights determination have existed for much of our nation's history. In 1952, Congress passed the McCarran Amendment, which enshrined a tradition of federal deference to state water laws. It also established a framework where the federal government was treated like a private entity for the purpose of seeking water rights within western states. The issue was seemingly settled until 2011 when the Obama administration's Forest Service issued a national interim directive for all 122 public land ski areas in the United States. The directive included a clause requiring applicant ski areas to relinquish privately held water rights to the United States as a permit condition. This was followed by a 2014 proposal from the Forest Service to evaluate all applications to states for water rights on Forest Service lands and applications for water rights on adjacent lands that could adversely affect Forest Service groundwater resources. Over the years, the committee has heard from stakeholders about ways Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management personnel have tried to dictate the use of water rights on grazing allotments, even going so far as making the use of an allotment contingent on relinquishing water rights. This bill would ensure that states have proper control of water rights determination, preventing federal government overreach. This concept is not controversial. In fact, a previous version of this bill passed the House of Representatives with a bipartisan vote. As I look at the dais here today and I see my friends from Nevada, from Utah, from Arizona, from Colorado, the eastern half of Oregon, from Idaho, and as we've looked at these water issues, and I have the benefit, I guess, being from Arkansas where we have a lot of water. We still have water issues in Arkansas, but it's not because we don't have enough water. But many of these states simply can't produce more water. There's not more water to go around. And I think these states should have a right to say how the water is used in their states. However, if I look a little further west to California, there is an abundance of water. There's more water produced in California than is used in California, and I would think my friends from California would want to leave the decisions on water in California with the state of California without the federal government stepping in and saying this is how water in California is going to be used. So I appreciate the gentlelady's bill, support the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time. Is there further discussion on the bill? Hearing none, is now ordered to consider amendments to H.R. 302. I recognize the gentlewoman from Utah, Ms. Maloy, for the purpose of offering her amendment in the nature of a substitute designated Maloy 11 A and S. Without objection, the amendment is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Ms. Maloy, you're recognized.
Thank you. The amendment makes no language changes from the introduced bill. I urge support from my colleagues, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I urge my colleagues to support this A&S as it makes a small technical edit to the bill. The A&S before us ensures that federal agencies cannot impose greater restrictions or regulatory requirements on a water right than allowable under applicable state laws. This is a common sense measure that I hope all of my colleagues will support. Again, I want to applaud Representative Maloy for her work in this legislation, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, it is now in order to consider amendments to the A&S to H.R. 302. No additional amendments to the bill or the A&S have been filed. Are there further amendments? Hearing none, the question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentlewoman from Utah, Ms. Maloy, designated Maloy 11 A and S. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. I move that the Committee on Natural Resources favorably report H.R. 302 as amended to the House. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on H.R. 302 will be postponed. It is now in order to consider the committee authorization and oversight plan for the 119th Congress. Copies of the plan were circulated to members' offices in accordance with the committee's notice requirements. Without objection, the plan will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized for purpose of debate on the plan? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is our first markup of the 119th Congress for the Natural Resources Committee. And we will be considering now Republicans' authorization and oversight plan for the next 2 years. A serious oversight plan would focus on serious problems and priorities. It would lay out a roadmap for the critical work of scrutinizing them. And most importantly, it would ensure that the most powerful entities under this committee's jurisdiction were being held accountable. But the proposal before us is not a real oversight plan. It's a press release, a rubber stamp for the most extreme anti-environment, pro-polluter agenda we have seen in decades. And while the Trump administration takes sweeping action that undermines the law, that flouts Congress's Article I authority, this committee's so-called oversight plan simply looks the other way. As we speak, an unelected billionaire is illegally accessing America's private information, purporting to dismantle vital programs. There is a blitzkrieg of executive orders pouring out of the White House to make life more difficult for hardworking people, erase progress, and bring climate action to a screeching halt. And yet, in the face of all this, the majority is asking us to mark up an oversight plan that not only fails to push back on these abuses of power, it refuses to even acknowledge them. Perhaps most egregiously, this committee's proposed oversight plan is silent on one of the most blatant attacks on the American people happening right now. The administration illegally withholding money for critical programs that our constituents depend on, things that members on both sides of the aisle say they care about. I'm talking about funding for wildfire response, water infrastructure, tribal health programs, and more. All of it is being stripped away, leaving communities in the lurch. If the majority was serious about oversight, this would be front and center in their plan, but instead, they are choosing to turn a blind eye. So let's be clear, this is not an oversight plan. It's a permission slip for industry influence, a permission slip for special interests looking to profit off public lands, a permission slip for unelected bad actors to wield power and line their pockets with taxpayer dollars at the expense of the American people. If this were a real oversight plan, it would scrutinize and demand accountability from an administration that is fast-tracking giveaways to big oil while stonewalling clean energy progress and actually trying to eliminate entire swaths of the clean energy industry. It would scrutinize and bring accountability to an administration that is stacking federal agencies with industry insiders who are bent on weakening health and environmental safeguards. An administration that is gutting programs meant to help the communities that we all represent. If Republicans were serious about oversight, their plan would reflect reality. It would acknowledge that climate change is not some distant threat, not some ideology, not some Chinese hoax. It's happening right now, devastating communities from coast to coast. They would recognize that environmental justice is not a luxury. It's a moral and legal obligation because countless American communities shouldn't be forced to bear extreme pollution levels just so a handful of corporate polluters can squeeze out a little more profit. Now imagine if Republicans demanded the same level of accountability from this administration that they insisted on when a Democrat was in the White House. Well, none of that is in this plan. There is no scrutiny. There is no accountability. This is not how Congress is supposed to work. This is not how this committee is supposed to function. It is a complete failure. The American people deserve better. They deserve a Congress that fights for them, for accountability and fairness for all Americans, not one that lets corporate polluters harm communities with impunity, that shrugs off the climate crisis and ignores environmental justice. This committee has a responsibility to the people we represent, to the country, and to future generations who will live with the consequences of our choices. Today, Republicans are failing that responsibility and the people they took an oath to serve. We might be in the minority, but Democrats will not stop demanding accountability. We will not stop exposing wrongdoing, and we will not stop fighting for real oversight. The stakes are too high, and the American people deserve nothing less. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. As a matter of housekeeping, when we did our organizing meeting, there were 4 positions on the dais for the Democrats that hadn't been filled yet, so I wanted to officially welcome back to the committee Ms. Dingle of Michigan, Ms. Velasquez of New York, and also welcome a new member, Ms. Brownlee of California, and Mr. Soto of Florida is coming back to the committee. So welcome to the committee. I'm glad that you're part of it and look forward to working together. And I now yield myself time to on the authorization and oversight plan. And as we look at this has been out for almost a month. We actually had it ready before the oversight or the committee organization meeting, and we delayed having a markup on it out of respect for the minority to give you more time to look at it. And also will point out that Republicans are very serious about oversight. In fact, House rules under Republicans require us to mark up an authorization and oversight plan, unlike House rules when Democrats are in control. So just the fact that we're actually debating our authorization and oversight plan, and there's opportunity to amend it, to say what you like or what you don't like about it, I think shows that we are serious about authorization and oversight. And I'm happy to be considering the committee's plan today. The American people sent a strong message in November that it's time for Congress to get to work maximizing governmental efficiency and productivity. In the 119th Congress, the House Committee on Natural Resources will continue to focus on strengthening America's environment and economy, unlocking our energy and mineral resources, promoting access to our public lands, stewarding our nation's wildlife and fisheries, tackling the systemic issues caused by drought in the West, and working closely with tribal and insular communities to promote economic opportunities, to improve public safety, and ensure they have the resources to thrive. The committee's authorization and oversight plan outlines a robust plan to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse within our jurisdiction. The committee will examine the laws and programs within our jurisdiction, seeking to reauthorize the activities that warrant it, reform those that need it, and repeal the laws and programs that no longer serve the best interest of the American people. I look forward to working with the members of the committee and the administration to do our part to leave our nation's government and natural resources better than we found them. I support the authorization and oversight plan before the committee today, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. I yield back and ask if there's further discussion. Any further discussion on the plan? Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
I thank the chairman. I just want to echo the remarks that were made by the ranking member with respect to the deficiencies in this oversight plan. And as I said yesterday during our first federal lands hearing, I think it's important to talk openly about the elephant in the room, because for whatever reason, and I suspect I know the answers, my Republican colleagues would like to kind of function as business as usual, notwithstanding what we see happening in Washington, D.C. Agency after agency being dismantled, federal workers being told to stop working on behalf of American taxpayers in a variety of different agencies, and yet our colleagues here, and this is laid bare within the oversight plan, which I'll go through, want to purport as though nothing has changed, that we can have normal conversations about land management and firefighting resources and all the rest, as their president dismantles the very agencies that would ultimately be responsible for implementing much of what they'd like to do. So I'll just give you an example, because as the chairman knows, I serve as the ranking member on the Federal Lands Subcommittee. If one goes to page 5 of the oversight plan and just engages in a cursory review of some of the components of the Federal Lands Oversight Plan, one will find references to deferred maintenance at our national parks and the desire of this committee to engage in oversight regarding that. Very curious, since literally thousands of employees, seasonal roles for our national parks were held in limbo over the course of the last 2 weeks by virtue of this president's executive order and agency actions with respect to OMB. There is reference here to forest health and wildfires, the need to engage in oversight regarding hazardous fuels reduction projects on our nation's forests. I certainly agree with that, but I would query the chairman or any member of this committee, who precisely will be doing that work on the ground? What agencies will you be working with? BLM, Forest Service, National Park Service? You name it. Every one of those agencies is potentially on the chopping block by virtue of the actions being taken by DOJ and this administration. It makes no sense to me to have, as part of this oversight plan, a reference to expanding access to our national parks when this administration is dismantling the federal workforce that manages access to our national parks. I'm just trying to understand, what are we doing here? If you want to pursue a reasonable conversation about some of these priorities, I'm all ears. I suspect the ranking member is too, as well as members on our side of the aisle. But let's dispense with this fiction that all is normal and that any of this would be possible. I'm not really sure what investigations or oversight you're going to be conducting, bottom line, on any of these matters, given the fact that the federal workforce is being gutted as we speak. And this impacts, by the way, every one of the states represented by members on this committee, on both sides of the aisle. There are states, I know we have a new member from Alaska, and welcome him to the committee. Alaska receives more federal funding than any other state in the union, with the exception of Louisiana. I'm reading articles, anybody who's watching can Google it. You can find the impact that the federal funding freeze and the federal workforce so-called buyout offer will have on Alaska, on Idaho, on Colorado, on Nevada. You can go down the line. And I guess hope springs eternal that my colleagues will join with us to prevent some of these rollbacks that are going to have a devastating impact on our states. I don't know what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are going to say to their local communities when BLM workers in Anchorage or Boise start getting laid off and furloughed. I suppose maybe y'all have an answer, but to me, I would think that given all of these priorities that you've articulated, Mr. Chairman, you want to do more forest hazardous fuel reduction projects, you want to expand access and recreation to national parks, these are your words, then maybe send a note to the President of the United States, who's the one really standing in the way of achieving any of this. With that, I know we're going to have a robust amendment process that perhaps will glean this out further, but I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back, and I have to commend the gentleman to get a zinger in there to our former colleague, Mr. Graves from Louisiana, when he's not even here anymore. Hopefully he's watching today, and we'll be honored by that. Is there further discussion? Mr. Fulcher, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to my colleague from Colorado, and referencing other comments. I think part of that needs a response, and I think that part of that response is just simply what we have is not working, and this is a recognition that what we have is not working. We have this somewhere in the neighborhood of a $9 billion backlog that the Forest Service is just simply not in a position to recoup. And they're not going to get there. And at $36 trillion in debt, they're not going to get funded more and more for a failing system. I believe the Interior Department is in the neighborhood of $32 to $33 billion with their backlog. Something different needs to be done. And I think part of the solution is to include the locals, to authorize some local stakeholder action to help them out. In my state, the federal agencies are absolutely overwhelmed. I had a hearing with BLM, Forest Service, Department of the State Ag Department here just a week ago. Brought everybody together because we were talking about how can we prevent another year where we've got 1 million acres that goes up in smoke just in our state. And the answer, in part, is we got to work together on this stuff. What we have, the system in place, simply doesn't work. And I don't care what anybody says, our agencies are overwhelmed. In a state like mine where you got 33 million acres under federal management, you got to do something different. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is automatic overnight, that it's all going to be fixed with local stakeholder involvement. Well, if we don't bring them in, a continuing failing system is going to result. And none of us want that. We've got a tremendous resource. Let's give it a chance to survive. That's why these changes are coming in place. It's not trying to gut the federal government. The federal government is already gutted in that regard. Let's figure out something new. Hopefully that makes some sense. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California, Mr. Menz, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Westerman. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on the Authorization and Oversight Plan. And I want to start by praising the Oversight Plan's identification of forest health as one of the topics the committee will focus on this year. I appreciate the Chair's interest in reducing catastrophic wildfires, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on that goal. However, with the funding chaos we've seen over the last few weeks, it is important that we make clear that those who suffer losses because of the catastrophic wildfires in Southern California should receive federal aid with no strings attached, just as has been the case with every other major disaster in modern history. Californians have never hesitated to step up and help those in need in other parts of the country when they have experienced hurricanes or floods or tornadoes with no conditions attached. We step up because we're all Americans, and united we stand, divided we fall. But I want to state the obvious here. If you do try to attach conditions to aid to Californians who are in need, you are setting a terrible precedent. Because the next time a disaster hits, it might be your communities that are impacted. And if you are saying that we are now going to play politics with aid to Americans, you are opening a Pandora's box here. Now, going back to the oversight plan, I want to echo the excellent comments from my colleague from Colorado. Oversight is, of course, a fundamental responsibility of Congress. And when any presidential administration attempts to govern outside the law, exceed their statutory authority, decimate agencies without consulting Congress, or purge the federal workforce, again, without consulting with Congress, Americans expect this body to step in and fulfill our oversight duty. And that oversight responsibility falls not just on the Oversight Committee on which I serve, but also on every committee and subcommittee in Congress. So while I appreciate that the committee's plan commits to, quote, ongoing oversight of the executive branch, we need more than just vague commitments. We need concrete action and strong protections. Now, as I mentioned during yesterday's subcommittee hearing, last May, President Trump requested a $1 billion donation for his campaign from the oil industry. And in the following months, oil executives sent hundreds of millions of dollars to his campaign. Now, of course, the Trump administration is putting forward an aggressive agenda to deregulate big oil. Where is the oversight? Where are the hearings and investigation on this? That's why I'm so concerned about the deletions of the provisions contained in last year's oversight plan for the committee for investigating conflicts of interest. Why are we dropping this crucial provision at a time when there seem to be so many conflicts of interest at play, particularly around many of the industries that this committee directly oversees? Now, in the past 2 weeks, the Trump administration has fired at least 18 inspector generals, attempted to fire thousands of FBI agents and DOJ staff and lawyers, and has ended any prosecution of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Meanwhile, Elon Musk and his Doge team are illegally stopping appropriations that we here in Congress, using the authorities expressly delegated to us by the Constitution, have mandated. Mr. Musk has refused to disclose his financial conflicts of interest, and he reportedly did not pass security clearance requirements due to his drug addictions and his close ties with China and Russia. There are reports that he is freezing out his competitors even as his own companies, including SpaceX, continue to receive massive amounts of federal funding. Now, I'm hearing from thousands of my constituents, and I'm sure many of you are as well, who are deeply concerned about the rule of law and the potential for rampant corruption in our government. As the Romans used to say, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, who watches the watchman? Americans deserve to have confidence that we here in Congress are doing our job and that we are above reproach, and that the laws we pass and the policies we enact are free from conflicts of interest. Yes, Donald Trump narrowly won the presidential election last year, and yes, congressional Republicans won a tiny majority. But let's be clear, this is not a mandate to ignore the rule of law or shirk our duties. Congress represents the American people, and each of us here is elected not by an electoral college, but by our constituents directly. And we've been exclusively given the authority to make laws and appropriate funds. And when those powers are illegally and unconstitutionally usurped by one man, particularly when that man is the richest man in the world, that strikes at the very heart of our American democracy. We owe a duty to the American people to exert our oversight and shine a light on what is happening right now. So I urge this committee to not cede its constitutional duties and to provide the type of oversight that the American people deserve and are demanding. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the plan? Hearing none, it's now in order to consider amendments to the committee authorization and oversight plan. I recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Hoyle. There you are. Ms. Hoyle, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Hoyle number 1. Without objection, the amendment is considered read. Ms. Hoyle, you've moved further up on the dais. I was looking in the wrong place for you.
Slowly working my way up to your seat. Yeah. No offense, Mr. Huffman.
You got to get on the other side of the dais to get in this seat.
There we are. Good one. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Communities across the country rely on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA's science, to provide sustainable fishing opportunities. Our fishermen feed the world. They create thousands of jobs across the country, and they're the economic heart of many coastal communities, including the district that I represent. This authorization and oversight plan includes oversight of the implementation of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. However, this plan is silent on the current administration's objectives for NOAA and the chaos that their rumored changes will cause for the commercial and recreational fishing across the country. Last week, the administration's Department of Government Efficiency entered NOAA facilities and accessed data and files. Furthermore, NOAA employees are reporting rumors of severe budget cuts that would gut essential programs and jobs that our fishermen and our communities rely on. Basic responsibilities such as providing grants to regional fishery management councils for their operations and routine fishery stock assessments could be delayed or canceled. Additionally, the Trump administration's directive to rescind 10 regulations for every new regulation gets messy with fishery management. Every management action, such as opening up a fishery season, is a regulation. Unfortunately, the administration has not clarified what DOGE is doing, what the long-term plans for NOAA is, and how these administrative orders will affect the science and service communities across the nation that we depend on. My amendment ensures this committee will exercise its oversight authority over this chaos and hold the administration accountable for carrying out Congress's directives under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. I urge a yes vote on my amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose this amendment, and I would point my colleagues to the NOAA budget that was proposed last year by the Biden administration. The budget request sought funding increases for the administration's political priorities like national marine sanctuaries while reducing funding requests for research efforts. Republicans on this committee have for years urged NOAA to refocus on its core mission of stock assessments, data collection, and collaborating with the regional fishery management councils. In recent years, we were met with silence as NOAA pursued their political agenda to the detriment of the agency's broader mission. We've seen recent successes in encouraging more accurate stock assessments, including improved management of red snapper, both in the Gulf and there's currently a bipartisan effort to improve red snapper management in the South Atlantic. We will continue to advocate for the most accurate science and data in making management decisions. I'd say most importantly that this amendment is premised on proposed cuts, which have only been reported based on unnamed sources. So there are no cuts out there right now, and there's no. I think that makes this amendment not pertinent to the discussions that we're having. I urge opposition to the amendment. I yield back, and I'll ask if there's further discussion on the amendment. Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
And Mr. Chairman, just to the point you just made, this is not a theoretical threat to these vital programs that NOAA oversees. We know that things like stock assessments and the science that we count on to regulate and manage fisheries, it's stopped, it's frozen in its tracks right now. And we also know that Project 2025 calls for shutting all of this down, for spinning off all of these vital NOAA functions, privatizing them. We know that this administration is moving forward with a plan to do that. So this is not theoretical. If our colleagues across the aisle actually care about things like integrating state data for the red snapper and other species and responsibly managing species with good stock assessments and good science so that people can get out on the water and make a living, they should join in supporting this amendment. That's what this is all about. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Hoyle, designated Hoyle number 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. I recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Hoyle, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Hoyle number 2. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The chaos at NOAA and the threats to hold back funding puts fishery disaster assistance at risk. In the past year, 4 fishery disaster declaration requests were approved by the Department of Commerce, and 7 other requests are still pending. Fishery disaster assistance is a long process. It often takes years for a request to be approved and ultimately to receive funding. We have pursued bipartisan efforts in Congress to speed up this process, which I still think is incredibly important, including enacting Rep. Donald's Fishes Bill at the end of last year. However, the confusion and chaos about the future of NOAA threatens to further complicate this process. My amendment would ensure this committee does its job to exercise oversight over the fishery disaster process and ensure the funding Congress appropriates gets to the intended recipients without delay. I hope we can continue our history of bipartisanship regarding fishery disasters, including asking hard questions of the administration when it jeopardizes this assistance. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on my amendment, and I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. The amendment cites, quote, efforts to dismantle NOAA or transfer the functions of the National Marine Fisheries Service to another agency. This is a point that President Trump's nominated leaders have repeatedly refuted. Howard Lutnick, the president's nominee to serve as the Secretary of Commerce, stated in his confirmation hearing in the Senate that he has no interest in doing this and that it is not on his agenda. We should take soon-to-be Secretary Lutnick at his word. Additionally, the amendment makes reference to potential delays in fishery disaster assistance. Many of us on this committee have heard concerns about NOAA, OMB, and the executive branch taking too long to administer disaster assistance. In fact, at the end of the last Congress, and the gentlelady from Oregon talked about the bipartisan work that we've done on the committee. At the end of the last Congress, the House and the Senate passed the Fishes Act unanimously, and President Biden signed it into law. This legislation reformed the disaster assistance process to ensure that OMB does not delay the review of these funds. This legislation will help ensure that communities in need receive this assistance in a timely manner. I am confident that we will continue to have oversight of the implementation of these changes over the course of this Congress. I believe the amendment is unnecessary and it does not strengthen or improve the committee's A&O plan. I urge opposition to the amendment and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Hoyle, designated Hoyle number 2. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote is requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. I recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Hoyle, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Hoyle number 3. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The majority's authorization and oversight plan acknowledges the important role of outdoor recreation and sportsmen and sportswomen's activities in conservation of our national wildlife refuges. My amendment ensures that this committee examines how a federal hiring freeze will make it more difficult for the National Wildlife Refuge System to perform basic services like providing safe access for hunters and recreational enthusiasts. The National Wildlife Refuge System is the world's largest network of lands and waters with the explicit mission of wildlife conservation. The system is already stretched thin with nearly no change in its budget since 2010. When accounting for inflation, the refuge system has less funding capacity now than it did 15 years ago. Despite a 36% increase in visitors since 2010, the number of full-time employees has decreased by 16%. Only half of the 500 refuge field stations are staffed, and only 7% of refuge land is managed for invasive species. These issues aren't just harming wildlife conservation, they're also hurting millions of Americans who depend on these refuges. Despite getting 67 million visitors a year, over the last 15 years, visitor services staff has decreased by 25%, turning away millions of visitors from visitor centers each year. And the system only has 20% of the recommended number of law enforcement officers needed to protect both the wildlife and the visitors in these parks, which I think we can all agree is critically important. The federal hiring freeze will only make these problems worse, so I urge a yes vote on my amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose this amendment, even though there's some things the gentlelady said that I agree with, but I think we're going to have that covered because the National Wildlife Refuge System is a crown jewel of American conservation, and it should be lauded as such, and that's why promoting access to the refuge system has been highlighted in the committee's authorization and oversight plan the last two Congresses. Last Congress, the committee led the charge to protect access to the refuge system by passing legislation such as Mr. Whitman's Protecting Access for Hunters and Anglers Act, which prevented the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from imposing unscientific bans on lead ammunition and fishing tackle in the refuge system. The committee also conducted rigorous oversight of the previous administration's proposed BITA rule. This oversight work successfully led to the formal withdrawal of the proposed rule in December of last year. If that rule had been finalized, access to and active management of the refuge system would have been irreparably compromised by de facto bans on important management practices such as predator control and cooperative agriculture. Our refuge systems are not doing what they could be doing and what they have done at times in the past. I know from refuges in my district that they are understaffed, and I think they've been getting some misguidance, and hopefully we can make these refuges all that they need to be, and we will have oversight on our fish and wildlife refuge system. But I don't believe this amendment is necessary. I oppose it, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Hoyle, designated Hoyle number 3. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. I recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Dexter, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Dexter number 4. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It feels like Oregon Day here. On Friday, January 24th, President Trump fired at least 18 inspectors general in a late-night email. Among those 18-plus inspectors general were the Inspector General for the Department of Interior, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Agriculture, 3 agencies over which this committee has jurisdiction. My amendment, as proposed, addresses this by asking that these unlawful firings be investigated. Current law requires that the president provide written justification and 30-day notice to Congress before any such firing. The Trump administration provided neither. This purge of inspectors general, which flies in the face of current law, sends a clear message. This administration is not committed to rooting out waste, fraud, or abuse in government. Instead, it is focused on installing loyalists who will stop at nothing to protect the president and his cabinet. This becomes even more clear when you look at who was spared in the purge. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General Joseph Kafari, who has a proven track record of misrepresenting fact and using taxpayer dollars for personal gain. and the Department of Justice Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, who spearheaded an effort lauded by Trump to investigate the FBI's handling of issues related to the Trump campaign. Independent inspectors general were created in response to President Nixon's Watergate scandal. They play an absolutely critical role in stewarding our taxpayer dollars and ensuring our federal agencies are held accountable. I am deeply concerned about this essential function and how it will be lost, and that those installed in these positions will be unwilling to take a stand against the Trump administration for fear of retribution. Or worse, they will actively undermine efforts to provide independent oversight to curry favor with the president. This is frightening when you look at the ethical track record of Trump's appointees in his first term. During the first Trump presidency, former Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke was criminally referred to the Department of Justice for multiple transgressions, and his predecessor, former Secretary David Bernhardt, was subject to a criminal referral for his role in a $250,000 bribe on behalf of President Trump. We are headed in an alarming direction, but there is one important point I would like to make before I close. While Trump has removed these inspectors general, their offices are still full of employees who take their mission seriously. We can and should expect them to continue to do their job as before with stubborn independence and pride in this country. There has never been a moment more prime for their work and their dedication. I am proud to join in the long legacy of Democrats on this committee who have advocated for good governance by making the investments necessary in our offices of Inspector General. I hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will show courage in this moment and join me in voting for this amendment that advances the principles of good governance, something we should all share, by adding to this committee's oversight plan an investigation into these firings and their impact on our ability to identify waste, fraud, and abuse, as well as corruption in our government. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I do oppose the amendment, but I certainly appreciate Congresswoman Dexter's commitment to identifying fraud, waste, and abuse. I think it's something we should all work diligently on. And as the new ranking member of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, I say congratulations, and I hope you're looking forward to the subcommittee's first hearing of the Congress this afternoon. I'm particularly looking forward to hearing not only from the tribal witnesses, but from both the GAO and the Department of Interior's Office of Inspector General as well. As we all know, sitting presidents have the authority to both hire and fire a number of staff in the executive branch, including inspectors general. A number of presidents, including President Biden, have exercised this authority, particularly when it comes to inspectors general. And I'll say personally, the Inspector General Greenblatt, I thought did a great job when he would come to our committee. He was very professional, and I would give him high marks, but he doesn't work for Congress. He works for the administration, and it's at the president's approval or disapproval. So it's not about particular IGs. It's about the president's ability to implement his agenda and to have the people working in the administration that he chooses. And as Ms. Dexter mentioned, the Office of Inspector General is more than just one individual, and the work of the office carries on through changes in leadership. And there will be people from the Office of Inspector General here this afternoon. The committee will continue to work with all future Inspector Generals, just as we have done in previous administrations. However, this amendment is unnecessary, and with that, I oppose the amendment and urge my colleagues to vote against it. Is there, Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, by pointing out that presidents technically have the authority to fire inspectors general, you glossed over a very important thing. The last time Trump engaged in political firings and retribution for inspectors general that embarrassed him by providing transparency and oversight into illegality and corruption in his administration, Congress had to come together and pass a bipartisan reform in 2022 to require 30 days notice before a president attempts to terminate an inspector general and a specific statement of the rationale for that firing. The whole point is that Congress should be able to make sure that this is on the level, that this isn't retribution, that this isn't covering up corruption. And so I just have to wonder, the gentlelady has proposed what should be a very non-controversial amendment. Historically, there's always been bipartisan support for the integrity of these independent agency watchdogs. Don't you want to know why President Trump just thumbed his nose at those reforms? Why he didn't at least just give 30 days notice so that we could look into it? Why he didn't offer some explanation for why he was firing 18 inspectors general across different agencies so that we could determine, is this on the level? Or is this a grievous blow to the transparency and oversight that historically has been broadly supported on both sides of the aisle? I just don't understand why there wouldn't be at least some Republicans joining to support what should be a very non-controversial amendment. I hope there are. I hope when we get to the roll call vote, we'll see a few, but it will be a significant test of whether there's any integrity left in oversight and accountability, whether we take seriously what used to be a strong bipartisan concern. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? There's no further discussion. The question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Dexter, designated Dexter number 4. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Mr. Huffman telegraphed he will be asking for a recorded vote. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Dexter, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Dexter number 5. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chair. Those on this committee know wildfires are getting larger, more frequent, and more costly. And undeniably, this is due to climate change. Recent studies suggest that reduced rainfall, dried out vegetation, and increasing overlap between flammable drought conditions and strong Santa Ana winds, all of which are linked to climate change, made the wildfires in LA 35% more likely to occur. As families in California recover, not yet, but recovering from this devastation, the sobering reality is that these megafires will only get worse as our climate crisis intensifies. Terrifying and devastating in their own right, as a pulmonologist, I look at these events through the lens of public health. I mourn for the lives lost, and I view it as absolutely essential that we take these events as an opportunity to get serious about addressing the long-term impacts of smoke exposure. When megafires hit, the smoke travels hundreds of miles, impacting air quality over vast areas. That wildfire smoke contains particles that are about 30 times smaller than the diameter of human hair, and when inhaled, can cause a number of health issues, including premature death in people with heart or lung disease, aggravated asthma, preterm birth, and decreased lung function. Those most vulnerable are seniors, those with disabilities, and young children, suffer the harshest consequences due to this exposure. And when they die, their death certificate will not say climate crisis or smoke exposure. But let's be very clear, that is indeed the cause of death. The amendment I am offering today is simple. It adds to the committee's oversight plan an investigation into the health impacts of megafires driven by anthropogenic climate change. Our most vulnerable will continue to suffer if we do not acknowledge the inextricable link between climate change and health. I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will join me in this effort to ensure that every community in this country, red or blue, has the information it needs to safeguard public health by facing the climate crisis head-on. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. Am opposed to the amendment offered by Representative Dexter, which seeks to require the committee to investigate the health impacts of megafires that it claims are driven by anthropogenic climate change. I think there are anthropogenic reasons for the mega fires that we see, especially in the West, and those man-made causes are our failure to manage our forest. And regardless of what the climate or the weather conditions are, we need to look at these forests and see what can we do to make them more resilient. We also know that just over the course of just a few months in 2020, wildfires in California emitted 112 metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is equivalent to the emissions produced by 24.2 million passenger vehicles in a whole year. So what we want to do is be able to make these forests more resilient, so we're not seeing massive catastrophic fires, so we're not spewing carbon into the atmosphere instead of sequestering it in the forest, and also that we're providing good wildlife habitat, we're protecting water and air, and I plan to have vigorous oversight of the way we take care of our forest here in the United States, especially on public lands. I oppose the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Dexter, designated Dexter number 5. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Request a recorded vote,
A
Mr.
recorded
Chairman.
vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment will be postponed.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, this is probably a good time to request unanimous consent to enter into the record a new executive order that was issued last night by President Trump with Elon Musk by his side during their surreal press conference, calling for an immediate plan across all federal agencies except for the military for large-scale reductions in force, and also capping any rehiring to no more than 1 rehire for each 4 employees that would be leaving, seeming to signal a 75% reduction in the federal workforce across the agencies of our committee's jurisdiction. Seems like something that should be in any serious oversight plan, so I request unanimous consent to enter that executive order in the record.
Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Min, for the purpose of offering his amendment designated Min number 6. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Chair Westerman. My amendment would authorize and instruct this committee to investigate DOJ and its efforts to cut the NOAA budget and workforce along the lines of what my colleague from California just mentioned in yesterday's executive order. Of course, what Elon Musk and DOJ are proposing to do, what they have tried to do, is blatantly unconstitutional and illegal. It is also ultra vires insofar as it clearly exceeds the scope of the executive order creating DOJ. That executive order, if you take a look back at it, clearly indicates that DOJ was meant to be a quote-unquote temporary organization, and that Elon Musk, as we learned later, was designated as a special government employee, a temporary employee, not a senior White House or government official. And I want to just talk to my Republican colleagues here, because the powers that he is usurping, this is not a partisan matter, he is usurping your powers too. Congress created and funded these particular agencies, these particular departments, including NOAA, and one man is trying to unilaterally take those powers away from us and cut these. Now, if you want to have a discussion about cutting NOAA, there's a way in place to do that, and that is through Congress. That is through this committee, and we can have that debate, and I'm sure we might not agree on the appropriate level of workforce and funding for NOAA, but that is really what it's at debate right now is, should one person be allowed to take away all of our powers, to unilaterally cut the workforce, and with the flick of a switch, literally, get rid of programs and workforces that he does not like. Now, NOAA is under his crosshairs, and of course, they perform a number of very essential services to our communities in the coastal area in particular, and no, I don't believe Starlink will be able to fill that void. If DOJ is successful, as Elon Musk is hoping to do, in cutting 50% of NOAA's workforce and canceling weather mitigation-related grants, it will have immediate impacts for communities across the country, including my district, and end up costing taxpayers much more in the long run. That's because NOAA's staff are on the front lines translating science into action to keep our communities safe, to save lives, and prepare us for a climate-resilient future. As the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So let's take a second to just consider what we stand to lose if this illegal and unconstitutional action is not stopped. It would mean severe cuts to the National Weather Service, which shares life-saving warnings and real-time data to keep Americans safe during natural disasters. These are the official weather alerts you see on the news and on your phone, which often precede what private weather stations get as far as their information. In fact, many private companies depend on NOAA's weather and climate data to run their businesses, all made possible by the agency's expansive network of satellites, airplanes, computer models, and dedicated staff. 5 days before the devastating fires in Los Angeles, it was the National Weather Service that began warning of strong winds and extreme fire conditions in the area. And I would just note that there's a lot of misconceptions about what happened in Southern California. We don't have a lot of forests in my area or in the Los Angeles area. These are brush fires. And I would encourage anyone who believes that this was a water management issue or forest management issue in these recent fires to talk to firefighters. Because if you do talk to them, they will tell you that it is impossible to deploy fire retardants and things like that when you have 100-mile-an-hour winds that essentially operate as a blowtorch. They had to wait till the wind subsided before they deployed, before they could try to address and respond to these wildfires, and that is the reason that the wildfires spread so quickly. NOAA helps prevent this and began warning of strong winds and extreme fire conditions in the area. NOAA satellites later detected heat signatures, tracked smoke pollution, and mapped fire perimeters. And this data was essential for the red flag warnings that were issued that helped our firefighters deal with the unpredictable conditions that were occurring and likely helped to save a lot of lives. This is not the kind of infrastructure that can be easily replaced, nor should it be. Losing NOAA or massive cuts to NOAA means that we'll lose out on the grants that are helping to restore critical habitats, to improve coastal protection, provide recreational opportunities, protect our open spaces. So I respectfully ask for your aye vote on this particular amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. And as this amendment suggests, NOAA's reach extends far and wide in the United States. And to the gentleman's point, I actually think NOAA does a pretty good job on the weather, not so much on marine mammals and the fisheries work that they do. But this committee has no jurisdiction over NOAA's work on the weather. That would be the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. But we do have jurisdiction over NOAA's work on federal fisheries, oceans, and coastal resources. In recent years, the committee has seen several examples of NOAA rulemaking that contradicted congressional intent, posed a grave threat to coastal economies, and restricted access to our natural resources. I believe that NOAA needs more scrutiny, not less, and that's why the Authorization and Oversight Plan includes action items such as reviewing the agency's budget and work on ESA, MMPA, and MSA, and we probably won't be asking too many questions about NOAA's weather service activities in oversight in this committee. I urge opposition to the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Mr. Min, designated Min number 6. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. Recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering his amendment, designated Huffman number 7. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that this debate over the Republicans' proposed Oversight and Investigations Plan can be a little confusing because we hear these expressions of concern for things like our federal wildlife refuges, but they won't look into what a 75% reduction in the workforce at those refuges would actually do to the safety and the management and the health and the access to those resources. They say they're concerned about wildfire, and yet right now, wildfire safety projects across the West are frozen. We may lose an entire season of important fuel load reduction work because of this funding freeze, and it appears nowhere in the Oversight and Investigation Plan. Our colleagues don't even want to talk about it. And so now we come to the issue of water. My friends across the aisle like to talk about the need for transparency and coordination in water management, but right now they are, by their silence, defending the Trump administration's impulsive, unscheduled water release that wasted billions of gallons of precious water in California for a photo op and caused nothing but harm. So let's just rewind a little bit. There were a slew of late-night executive orders from President Trump issued in talking about California water, and to sort of make good on some of the things he said that were not true, that were not within his legal ability to deliver. He looked around the water system in California, tried to get the Bureau of Reclamation to release some water so he could have a photo op, but they wouldn't do it because they knew that didn't really work. It would be a waste. It would not be lawful. And so he found a couple of dams managed by the Corps of Engineers on the east side of the Tulare Lake bed in the southern San Joaquin Valley. Corps of Engineers, of course, is going to dutifully follow chain of command and say, yes, sir, to the commander-in-chief. And so he told him to just dump some water from Terminus Dam and Schaefer Dam in California's Central Valley. These releases were ordered with no planning or coordination, and the justification that this was to somehow support wildfire response in Southern California is laughable on its face. That water could not physically move to Southern California, nor did it go to Southern California. So we know the water never reached Southern California because that's not how the system was designed. The administration either didn't know that or didn't care, and so instead of helping with California's water needs, all of that water was simply wasted. It was dumped into a dry lake bed where it evaporated. And if that wasn't bad enough, the releases also violated flood safety protocols. Local officials were blindsided, given almost no notice that water levels would suddenly surge to channel capacity. Now imagine being a water manager or a farmer downstream watching your water supply get flushed away with zero water, no plans. That is not an emergency response, that is chaos. It's a tantrum, really. In fact, experts called it a combination of political bluster and blinding ignorance. A former irrigation district manager told the Los Angeles Times, "This is going to hurt farmers." But the Trump administration bragged on social media about the beautiful water flow, claiming the releases would help farmers and fight wildfires. Yeah, that's clearly not what happened. Again, 2 billion gallons of precious water that was supposed to be saved for summer irrigation and other critical needs was dumped. If you could light water on fire, that's what they did. The irony here is staggering. This was supposed to help with wildfire response and water supply. It did the opposite. Instead of careful science-based management, we get a knee-jerk reaction that wasted water, put public safety at risk, and worsened future water shortages. So now, that's something that obviously this committee should have an interest in. There should be some oversight. There should be some scrutiny, right? In any real oversight plan, that would be the case. If an administration can arbitrarily drain reservoirs on a whim with no accountability, what's next? My amendment is very simple. It simply makes clear that water management should be based on sound policy, not politics, not incompetence, not tantrums, certainly not impulsive decisions that leave communities scrambling. The public deserves better. Responsible management of our water supplies isn't optional, neither is oversight. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I do oppose this amendment. The issue that's raised here in this amendment is not within the purview of the Committee on Natural Resources. As Mr. Huffman accurately pointed out, Terminus and Schaefer Dams are owned and operated by the Army Corps of Engineers. Mr. Huffman and I both serve on the T&I committee, and that's where jurisdiction over the Army Corps of Engineers resides. If there are concerns with the operation of these dams, that would be on the T&I committee. However, I do want to highlight what I think was the main point of this amendment, and that's that we need to do everything in our power to make sure our western states, including California, can not only build new critical water infrastructure, but also manage it in a way that helps the people it was built to help. The committee will prioritize working with the administration to advance these priorities. Urge opposition to the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the... Oh, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this amendment. As everyone who has the great pleasure of representing California knows, water management is complex and critical to our communities' livelihoods, and the threat of wildfire is a constant reality, exacerbated by climate change and drought. Our communities depend on science-based policies that ensure water supplies are used efficiently to sustain our communities and the environment. Any mismanagement of water resources will have real and devastating consequences. Unfortunately, earlier this month, there was an uncoordinated and ineffective water release in California, framed by the current administration as an effort to help combat the wildfires in Southern California. However, releasing billions of gallons of water ultimately did nothing to assist with fighting wildfires in Southern California because the water delivery system in question wasn't designed to reach Southern California. Rather than using this water for its intended uses, the releases drained local reservoirs that are vital for municipal and agricultural uses. California continues to face historic drought conditions and increasingly severe wildfires. This is exactly why it's crucial for this committee to conduct oversight, ensuring that water management is rooted in sound science and effective policies that protect our communities. That is precisely the purpose of this amendment. This amendment reaffirms the committee's commitment to overseeing the administration's water management and make sure that our water supplies are managed responsibly and in the best interests of all stakeholders. I urge my colleagues to support Mr. Huffman's amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady from California, Ms. Rivas, yields back. Is there further discussion? Mr. Hernandez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
And I yield my time to Mr. Huffman.
I thank the gentleman from Puerto Rico. And Mr. Chairman, I'm disappointed to hear a super narrow interpretation of this committee's jurisdiction in order to avoid what obviously is an awkward subject, because this is a case right now where none of my Republican colleagues want to defend what Donald Trump did. This little tantrum that he had that dumped billions of gallons of water into a dry lake bed to be wasted. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge that the emperor just has no clothes this time. And so I guess now we're going to say because these were flood control dams, that's Army Corps jurisdiction, that should be over at T&I. They should be talking about it at T&I, don't get me wrong. But the impacts of what happened there clearly touch on our jurisdiction. These flood control dams also serve a water supply purpose, which implicates our jurisdiction. So, I have seen this committee time and again stretch jurisdiction when it suits the majority. We waded deep into the immigration debate in the last Congress using a tortured expansion of jurisdiction in order to do some grandstanding on that subject. I have seen it time and time again, but this right now is something that our colleagues across the aisle just don't want to talk about it. They want to say, brilliant move, Mr. President, great job dumping all that water, and move on. Talk about it in some other committee. Deeply disappointing, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on it? Mr. Lamalfa, you're recognized.
Boy, you want to talk about dumping water, all right, in California. Well, in this particular case, these lakes were over the conservation level. Water, if further was going to have to come in, was going to have to be released someplace where it ended up going to groundwater recharge zones in the valley. Now, let's switch gears and go to Northern California, where Lake Shasta is dumping 62,000 CFS right now. Lake Oroville, more than what's coming in there. I don't have today's number on the top of my head. And so that water is going down to the Delta, where between 180 to 200,000 CFS are flowing out the Delta, and the pumps at the south end of the Delta are only taking in about 6,000 CFS of a possible 15,000 if they're being run to capacity. Federal pumps are being run somewhere close to 100%. The state pumps are being run at about 20%. Therefore, every day we're leaving about 15,000, 18,000 acre feet on the table that could be filling up San Luis Reservoir or one of the groundwater recharge zones in the valley. So let's talk about wasting water. Let's talk about how the whole state is suffering because of the lack of planning, the lack of building more storage. We could be raising Shasta Dam 18 feet and gain 600,000 more acre feet. We could be stop the foot dragging on building Sites Reservoir, which would hold 1.5 million acre feet. And we could be doing other things that would actually help some of our neighboring states if we held more of our water. Instead, the water is allowed to flow every year because of bogus biological opinions or operating permits in the Delta that don't allow us to impound the water. Shasta's going to have to increase its flow, it looks like, because they're expecting atmospheric storms of a huge volume later this week. And so right now it's flooding out part of the city of Redding and major roadways down in Glenn County. And as the water flows out to the Pacific because they won't run the pumps because of an operating permit. So is this a little bit frustrating? Yeah, because we're going to see so far, the allocations, unless it's been updated, are 20% on state water project water to agriculture and 20% for the federal project, so CVP. There's people down there that have to make decisions on whether they're going to keep their orchards in the ground or not, or push orchards out based on whether that number jumps from 20 to 40%, which any fool could tell at least 40% of the water eventually be allocated, but they don't do so until May or June or something like that. So farmers long have lost the opportunity to decide, should I plant X amount of acres? Should I put in a new orchard or tear out my old orchard? Because of the lack of management, the lack of the ability to discern whether weather patterns using 50-year-old manuals by Army Corps of Engineers, who's dragging their feet on updating the manuals, do they have actually dynamic scoring on weather to know what's going to come in? So you want to talk about wasting water, at least in the case we're talking about. If it went to groundwater recharge, great, that's needed for the valley. So regulations called Sigma are coming into place, and everybody in agriculture is really worried about that, because when you have the State Water Resources Control Board of California emphasizing control over people's water supply and their water rights and their property rights and every other thing, yeah, the whole ag community is pretty shaky right now. But this place doesn't seem to care all about that much, and it certainly don't seem to care that much in the state of California. So with that, if you want to talk about water management and about water we're wasting right now, hundreds of thousands of acre feet through the Delta every year, not being captured. And we're just talking a tiny percentage. When you're talking, again, 180,000, 200,000 CFS flowing out, and all we need to do what we can with available technology and available equipment to run the Delta pumps, increase them from 6,000 to 15,000 CFS. You think you're going to miss 9,000 CFS? Well, the environmental groups will find a way to say, yeah, we're going to miss that. It might affect 10 fish. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Ms. Amari. Ms. Randall, excuse me. Still trying to get all the names. You're recognized
Thank
for 5
you
minutes.
so much, Mr. Chair. And while I was previously unfamiliar with the details of the case that Mr. Lamalfa has been telling us about, it sounds like a really good argument in support of this amendment to have more oversight over the management of water resources. But I think I'll yield my time to Mr. Huffman to tell us more.
I thank the gentlelady. That was exactly going to be my point, that if we want to actually come together and look into sound water management, science-based water management, this is a good amendment that ought to get a lot of Republican votes. So I appreciate my colleague at least being willing to talk about what happened with these two Army Corps releases of water in the Tulare Lake Basin. But the gentleman made an assertion that this was all business as usual under the flood control rules for those dams. There is extensive reporting, and all of my information indicates that that's not true, that this is actually a major deviation. And so I would think the gentleman and his colleagues would want to join us in finding out more about that. Was it on the level? Did it comply with the flood curves? Or was it an exceptionally rare and even dangerous deviation from those flood curves? And why and how would something like that happen? The gentleman asserted that the water just went down to recharge the groundwater below, that farmers are perfectly happy with that. Well, there's extensive reporting from the farmers and the water districts in that area that manage groundwater, that manage the infrastructure to do what the gentleman's talking about, saying just the opposite. That had they had notice, had there been coordination, maybe some of this water could have been put to use, could have gone into groundwater, but they didn't get that notice. It wasn't coordinated, and so the water was wasted. That's all just a matter of fact. It's all extensively reported, but if there were questions, we could look into it together if the gentleman wanted to support this amendment, and I hope he will. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields, the gentlelady yield back.
I do, thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 7. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. Speaking of the Central Valley of California, where they grow a lot of lettuce and vegetables, there is lunch back in the room. It's salads and sandwiches that I'm sure a lot of that was produced with California water and agriculture. So everybody, both sides of the dais are welcome to go back and grab lunch.
Don't forget Arizona,
It's
especially this time of year. Yuma.
It's probably Arizona.
No cotton at this time. This is leafy green time.
Yeah. So I now recognize Ranking Member Huffman for purpose of offering his amendment designated Huffman number 8. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And no matter how much we disagree about some things, I always appreciate your hospitality when you provide us with lunch during long markup. So thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, the Trump administration's decision to freeze federal funding has impacted countless projects and critical needs across the country. Water infrastructure is no exception. These disruptions have directly impacted efforts to secure our nation's water supply, enhance drought resilience, strengthen wildfire response. Federal funding does not operate in a vacuum. Many of these projects depend on a cost-sharing model where states, local governments, and tribes contribute resources alongside the federal government. And when the federal government suddenly pulls back, it doesn't just slow things down, it forces non-federal partners to walk away entirely. And when that happens, shovel-ready projects are abandoned. Communities are left vulnerable, and the long-term costs of inaction only grow. This is not a hypothetical. We're already seeing the consequences of this disruption. Projects designed to protect drinking water supplies, to modernize outdated infrastructure, restore watersheds, to reduce wildfire risks, they have all been put on hold or canceled outright. In the middle of a historic drought and worsening wildfires, this is not only bad policy, it is a direct threat to public safety and economic stability. And instead of taking real action to address drought, this administration is pretending they can turn a magic water valve in California on, somehow access unlimited supplies from the Northwest and Canada, and then passing off a routine maintenance project on the Delta pumps as some kind of a breakthrough that suddenly released water. It is gaslighting of the highest order. We need real oversight to assess the full impact of the decision to freeze water funding. How many drought resilience projects were delayed or canceled? How much funding was lost because non-federal partners couldn't afford to move forward without federal support? How did these disruptions affect communities already grappling with extreme water shortages and devastating wildfires? This amendment ensures that we get those answers. If an administration's political agenda puts our water supply, our wildfire response, and our communities at risk, Congress has a duty to investigate. Water security shouldn't be a partisan issue. It's a basic necessity. If we're serious about oversight, we must be serious about holding this administration accountable for decisions that harm the American people. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. And Mr. Chairman, with the remaining time I have, I would just like to request unanimous consent to enter into the record several things related to the funding freeze and how it is impacting infrastructure, starting with a CNN article entitled, "Republicans Repeatedly Criticized Biden's Infrastructure Program, Then They Asked for More Money." And the article goes on to cite examples where Mr. Gosar, Ms. Boebert, Mr. McClintock, and Mr. Amodei all have projects that they have celebrated that are funded by these laws that they opposed. All of that funding, by the way, is now frozen. These projects are in jeopardy. So I would hope they would take an interest in joining us in looking into this and supporting my amendment. I'd also request unanimous consent to enter 4 press releases from committee colleagues, Mr. LaMalfa, Ms. Radewagen, Ms. Boebert, and then one from Colorado, Senator Hickenlooper, talking about these projects in their districts. Mr. LaMalfa mentioned the Sites Reservoir, $30 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law there. There's another one from Ms. Radewagen, $11 million for the U.S. territories from the Inflation Reduction Act. Of course, Ms. Boebert is calling for the completion of funding for the Arkansas Valley Conduit, a project that's gotten $500 million from the Bureau of Reclamation under the bipartisan infrastructure law. All of this is frozen and in jeopardy. And then finally, an ABC News article entitled "House Republicans Tout Infrastructure Funding They Voted Against," which talks about how Mr. Whitman secured $70 million for the Port of Virginia in Norfolk, again, a project that is now frozen and in limbo because of these executive orders. With that, I yield back.
Without objection, so ordered. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself in opposition to the amendment. Ensuring critical water infrastructure is funded is very important. However, this amendment's assertion that the Trump administration is going to somehow stop building new infrastructure is, I believe, inaccurate. The reality is that California's complicated and onerous regulations and permitting processes are the primary reason water infrastructure projects fail in California. You only need to look back as far as September of last year when a water storage expansion project actually did fail in California. For 10 years, there was a push in the Bay Area to increase the storage capacity of the Los Vaqueras, thank you, Mr. LaMalfa, reservoir as an insurance against other drought. But as time dragged on without construction, new state regulations and permit restrictions kicked in, and the project became more expensive to the point where folks just gave up. That did not happen under the Trump administration. It happened under the Biden administration. Another project that is not yet moved, as Mr. LaMalfa mentioned earlier, is the Shasta Dam raise. The state and Democratic members of this committee opposed that project and have gone as far as including riders to prohibit funding for that project. Republicans on this committee and President Trump are committed to providing stable and reliable water supplies to communities across the West. Unfortunately, in the examples I've just given, the policies that have caused non-federal cost-share partners to withdraw and projects to fail are those being pushed by my colleagues across the aisle, some of them on this committee. I urge opposition to the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. LaMalfa, you're recognized.
You know, the discussion about the Infrastructure Act being about a $1.2 trillion amount of spending, yes, why wouldn't us on this side of the aisle, seeing that much money has been dumped into the trough, at least try to recover part of it for some of the projects we've been talking about and have it go for useful things, go for good things, instead of completely for things that are non-infrastructure, which was a major part of that bill. So, you know, call it what you want, but if the money's going to get spent, at least let's move it in the direction of the stuff we've been talking about the whole time anyway. And as my chairman talked about here, what a tragedy that the Los Vaqueros project doesn't get to have an expansion, because that helps the Bay Area. I think we need to help the water supply of everybody in California. Some would say, oh, you guys up north, well, you're very parochial. You only want to worry about your needs up there. Like, no. In fact, so much of the water comes from the north and flows to the south. So the more we do to store water, such as Los Vaqueros, or enhancing the San Luis Reservoir, which we should be filling up at every opportunity. Interestingly, San Luis Reservoir 2 years ago was topped off. Last year, under very similar snowpack and rain conditions, the reservoir didn't get full at all. I think at best 75%, if memory serves. And so that means about 500,000 acre-feet got left on the table that Californians could have used. And again, with Los Vaqueros, a fairly easy project to build to enhance an existing infrastructure and being lost due to bureaucracy, due to things that drive the cost up even more so and just make it not feasible. That's a tragedy for the people of the Bay Area. We have opportunities to do this all around the state and in the West, and the continued onslaught from environmental groups suing and dragging their feet, whether, you know, talking water storage, talking timber recovery after fire. It's one thing after another. So I think the discussion needs to be on how we can further streamline things and help people all over my home state, NorCal, Southern Cal, because indeed more water supply would be helpful, as our city folks are going to see rationing down to 55 and then 50 and then 42 gallons per day per person, while they watch hundreds of thousands or millions of acre-feet over a period of time just flowing out to the sea. Some will argue, well, hey, why don't we do just more desal? Well, they tried desal down in Southern Cal. The Poseidon group tried that for 20 years. to go through a permit and regulatory process. They jump through every hoop you could think of as Coastal Commission or others would throw. What about this? What about that? In building a desal project, I think at Huntington Beach. And after 20 years of spending millions of dollars and jumping through every hoop, the final decision by the Coastal Commission was a big fat no. So you don't want to store more water. You don't want to desalinate water. And hey, I'm all in favor of conservation and recycling on that, but you could only stretch that so far, especially when those recycle and conservation efforts don't have water to move to begin with. You have to build more supply. And that's important for the, up until recently, increasing population. It was designed for about a population of 25 million, and we have 40 million people in the state. And we do have to think about our neighbors in the other western states that share in the Colorado River and how far that's being stretched. California could be helping itself and not just telling the other ones that, well, we're just going to continue to take what we got. And we're all going to pay a big price for it for much longer. So we got to take real action and take advantage of what Mother Nature blesses us with. Even in drought years, there's still plenty of water that we can be impounding and doing good with. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 8. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. Out of generosity and goodwill today, we're going to go out of order on some of our amendments here to try to accommodate everyone. And also, Mr. Huffman, you gave me too much credit for lunch today. If it weren't for your 20 amendments, we wouldn't be here during lunch. But maybe you deserve credit for lunch on the committee today. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Ansari, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Ansari number 13. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Chairman. As we speak, Elon Musk and his band of unvetted DOGE employees are gaining access to more and more of our country's sensitive data. Information like Social Security numbers, students' financial aid information, federal employee salaries, and tax returns, illegally in many of the cases. DOGE is in the Department of Energy, which houses the Nuclear Security Administration and oversees and maintains the U.S. nuclear weapons complex and labs. While DOGE says they are not meddling with our nuclear secrets, I'm not sure what's stopping them. Certainly not Republicans in Congress. The president has even threatened that the military could be Elon Musk's next stop. Under the guise of efficiency, Republicans in the administration are letting an unelected billionaire rampage our federal systems who has already demonstrated that he does not respect the U.S. Constitution. And there seem to be no guardrails on what information Elon Musk or DOGE has access to. No one will be spared. If the door is open for Elon Musk to access our nuclear secrets, what's stopping him from accessing sensitive information on oil and gas companies operating on public lands, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, pipelines, transmission lines, and other essential energy infrastructure? There is an unelected billionaire running amok in our federal system who has already demonstrated he does not respect the Constitution. If we really cared about national security, we would not be letting this happen. So this amendment says that the committee should aggressively investigate the access of sensitive data, including sensitive corporate information, trade secrets, and financial information of oil and gas companies operating on our federal lands and water by DOGE employees and associates, including to determine which laws were violated and what data has been compromised and by whom. The amendment also directs the committee to pursue legislation to ensure that such data cannot be unlawfully accessed again, as well as appropriate legislation to undo or mitigate any harms from the unlawful exposure of such information. This is common sense, and I urge adoption of this amendment, and I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is such a no-brainer. I think it's going to be fascinating to see if some of our Republican colleagues would join us in supporting this obvious common sense amendment. You know, it wasn't that long ago that many of my friends across the aisle were passionate in the FISA debate. Remember Section 702, I think it was, of FISA, where they were completely paranoid about even federal intelligence and law enforcement agencies having access to some data that might be private, personal data of Americans. It was remarkable how passionate they were at the time. And now fast forward, Donald Trump is handing the keys to the entire federal government, including all of our taxpayer records, our most sensitive personal information, to an unelected private actor, Elon Musk. Imagine just for a minute, if a Democratic president reached into the private sector and grabbed, let's say, a liberal billionaire, take your pick, Bill Gates, Bloomberg, if we really want to trigger our friends across the aisle, George Soros, all right, and handed them the keys to the federal government, invited them to just go root around, see what you find, get read-write access to some 20-year-olds and, you know, let them muck around in these programs. Let them take a look at that. Maybe start firing some people, start shutting down some agencies and programs. There would be an outcry like we have never seen if a Democratic president proposed to do that. But what we get right now from our Republican friends is crickets. So look, DOJ is losing in the courts. They're losing decision after decision, including from judges that were appointed by Donald Trump. One of them actually clerked for Clarence Thomas. So there's no question about the illegality of what is happening here. The only question is about the crickets we hear across the aisle. So this is, it's remarkable that we would even have to debate whether to support an amendment like this. I hope there's still some semblance of concern for privacy and data integrity and lawfulness, and that would be something my Republican friends want to see in their oversight and investigation plans. If so, they will support this common sense, no-brainer amendment. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McClintock, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
My friend Mr. Huffman complains that Mr. Musk is an unelected bureaucrat. I would remind him that every bureaucrat is unelected. That's why the elected president of the United States is solely vested with the executive powers of the federal government. There is no bureaucrat who is independent of the president, because that would mean they're independent of the people, which is the very definition of tyranny. Mr. Musk is accountable to the president, who is accountable to the people. The threat we face is from unelected bureaucrats of my friend's ilk working contrary to the will of the people as expressed through the presidential election. I'd remind him that it is not hard to find a leftist judge or two at the trial court level. But as these measures move through the court system, I think he is going to see the Supreme Court affirm the second article of the American Constitution, which says that the executive powers shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. It's not a complicated situation. New boss takes over, hires an accountant. The accountant calls in the Democrats and says, "I'd like to see your expense records, please." And the Democrats freak out. Well, what does that tell you about what's been going on? The reason that the president is charged with the responsibility to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. He can't do that if he's not allowed to open the books and find out how that money is being spent, whether it's being spent in accordance with law, and to stop it if it's not. That's what's going on, and that's what my friends on the other side of the aisle are objecting to. And I think people can draw their own conclusions of the reasons that the Democrats are freaking out over a simple opening the books and a revealing of where people's money is being spent. They say that the most closely guarded secrets in the federal government are not those that are labeled top secret. It's those that are embarrassing. Mr. Musk is embarrassing the Democrats, and we can see their reaction. I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Ansari. Did I say your name correctly? Is that correct? Designated Ansari number 13. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Recorded vote, please.
A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. Okay, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, for the purpose of offering Mr. Negus's amendment designated Negus number 11.
Thank you,
Without
Mr.
objection, the amendment is considered read. Sorry about
No,
that.
no
Sorry for
worries.
the
Thank you,
delay.
Mr. Chairman. Pinch-hitting for Mr. Negus on this amendment, which is simple. We think it should be nonpartisan, non-controversial, hope springs eternal. But this simply directs the committee to investigate the impacts of this administration's efforts to freeze and block the hiring and onboarding of thousands of seasonal federal firefighters. You heard me right. The Trump administration will not allow land management agencies right now to hire seasonal firefighters. This is outrageous. Investigating what impacts this will have on federal efforts to mitigate wildfire risk and prepare for the upcoming fire season should be something we can all agree on as a priority for this committee to examine. Climate change, of course, is driving longer and more intense wildfire seasons. As we all saw play out with the devastating fires in Southern California, the stakes are incredibly high. Federal land management agencies rely on about 15,000 seasonal firefighters to fight fires, promote forest resilience, and keep our communities safe. Now is the time these agencies need to be working and preparing and planning for the fire season. So despite this urgent need, President Trump and Elon Musk have decided to blow up the federal government, that is more important than staffing up and preparing for the upcoming season. This should not be allowed to stand. Understanding the ramifications of this decision should be a priority for this committee. That's what this amendment is all about. I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Mr. Negus, designated Negus number 11. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
A recorded vote, please.
A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, for the purpose of offering the amendment designated Negus number 12. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another one for my colleague, Mr. Negus here. This amendment would simply add an investigation into the impact of the hiring freeze on the National Park Service into the committee's authorization and oversight plan. Mr. Chairman, I am sure I am not the only one sitting in the committee room today that has heard from countless constituents who are deeply concerned about the impacts of the administration's hiring freeze. This short-sighted action places our public lands and their visitors at great risk. The National Park Service relies on thousands of seasonal employees every summer who conduct maintenance, operate facilities, and keep our parks running and able to welcome millions of visitors every year. It is unconscionable that the current administration has not only denied them the recognition they so deserve, but has frozen hiring for these critical positions right as agencies are gearing up for the busy summer season. Mr. Negus's district in Colorado is home to Rocky Mountain National Park, unquestionably a jewel of America's national park system and one of our most treasured places. But there are many national parks and public lands all across the country, small and large, in Democrat and Republican districts. They're going to suffer as a result of this hiring freeze if it is not rectified. And already we know thousands of seasonal employees have had their job offers withdrawn or delayed. All of us on this committee should care about that. We should be concerned about what a seasonal hiring freeze means for our nation's parks this summer. And that's why the amendment from Mr. Negus would ask for an investigation into the impacts of this hiring freeze on operations and maintenance of our national parks. Mr. Chairman, our lands and our communities rely on us to conduct real oversight. It is a disservice to our nation for an oversight plan to pass out of this committee that does not include an investigation into this critical matter. Urge adoption of the amendment and yield back.
The gentleman yields. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Mr. Huffman, designated Neguse number 12. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Request a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. Recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, for the purpose of offering the amendment designated Neguse number 15. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the third of my pinch-hitting at-bats for Mr. Neguse. This amendment would add investigations and accountability of DOJ's interference with NOAA's important work into the committee's authorization and oversight plan. So we've been hearing rumors for the past 2 weeks that Elon Musk's DOJ is charting significant layoffs at key science agencies like NOAA. We've been hearing about a 50% cut to the NOAA workforce or more based on last night's executive order. Also a 30% budget cut, which, by the way, would be up to Congress, not Elon Musk. DOJ staffers are showing up at NOAA. They did it last week, demanding access to computers, emails, and chats, asking employees to justify their existence at the agency. We don't know what sensitive information and data systems that they have access to at this point, or what they're doing with all of that information. And yesterday, President Trump, as I said, signed a new executive order directing agencies to significantly reduce the federal workforce. So NOAA is responsible for operating countless congressionally authorized and appropriated programs that provide life-saving data and services for communities facing the threat of wildfire, which the President does not have the unilateral authority to disband and simply override. Now, this includes NOAA's National Weather Service, which provides our communities and our first responders with real-time updates on weather patterns, including wildfires. This helps keep America safe. During times of crisis, NOAA's coordination with local first responders is invaluable. NOAA's Storm Prediction Center and Climate Prediction Center provide critical short-term and seasonal forecasts predicting drought conditions, which can contribute to the rapid spread of wildfires. NOAA's Fire Weather Forecast gives early warning for the conditions and locations where the risk of wildfires is going to be especially high, helping communities prepare and helping other agencies focus resources appropriately. Mr. Neguse's district is home to a critical NOAA facility, the NOAA Earth System Research Laboratory, which includes several key divisions that focus on climate, weather cycles, and more. So his amendment would ensure that this committee exercises oversight to understand the changes that DOJ is proposing at NOAA and how it will hinder NOAA's science and forecasts which inform wildfire response. By interfering with NOAA's important work, DOJ is putting our communities at risk. And for that reason, it is imperative that the committee investigate these claims and hold DOJ accountable. Urge adoption of this amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Mr. Huffman, designated Neguse, number 15. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Recorded vote, please.
A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering his amendment designated Huffman number 9. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would ensure that the Natural Resource Committee maintains its commitment to Indian country and does everything in our power to protect the private data and sensitive cultural information of tribal nations. We cannot let Indigenous people get lost in the fray as this administration continues to allow Elon Musk and his DOJ tech bros to ransack through the federal government and unlawfully gain unfettered access to Americans' private information. Actions taken by this administration to freeze federal funding and to flat out ignore tribal nations' unique political status and sovereignty in this country have already caused immense confusion and worry in Indian country. I know because I represent more tribes than anyone in the lower 48 states, and I have been meeting with them and hearing from them. I've also heard from many of the tribes some of you represent. This is a problem right now. It's causing incredible concern and real impacts in Indian country right now. This adds to a centuries-long history of the United States ignoring the needs of tribal nations, and this committee should be committed to rebuilding that trust no matter what administration is in office. By working with tribes on a government-to-government basis to protect their data and any culturally sensitive information, we're also protecting sacred sites, we're protecting traditions, and ultimately protecting tribal sovereignty. My amendment would require the committee to investigate the access of sensitive tribal data, including sensitive personal data and sensitive information about tribal religious practices and sacred sites by Doge employees and associates, including a determination of whether laws were violated and whether that data has been compromised, and if so, by whom. The amendment would also commit us to pursuing appropriate legislation to ensure that such tribal data remains off limits, that it cannot be unlawfully accessed, as well as legislation to undo or mitigate any harm that's resulted from what Doge has already done. I request support for this amendment from my colleagues and yield back.
The gentleman yields. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'm glad to hear religion on this issue from the ranking member. As we heard so eloquently from, in particular, the Alaskan tribes, last session of Congress. For you new members, you may want to go back and look at some of the testimony that was delivered when they talked about how they were ignored. They were ignored by the Biden administration. They were ignored by Secretary Holland when they asked for greater input in regards to be able to provide the natural resources that keep America running, in particular oil and gas. And when they wanted their voices heard, they were ignored. And it was very unfortunate. I can assure you, with the new administration, those same Alaskan tribes, they are going to be heard. I yield back. Is there further discussion on this amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 9. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. I recognize the ranking member for the purpose of offering his amendment, designated Huffman number 10. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are getting ever closer to lunch, but I do have one more amendment. Democrats have made historic investments in public lands restoration, climate resilience, and wildfire risk reduction through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. These laws delivered billions to projects across the country, red and blue states alike, that make communities safer and landscapes more resilient in the face of climate change. But now, with the Trump administration's reckless actions to unlawfully withhold American tax dollars, these critical investments are being undermined, delayed, halted, sometimes outright canceled. So this isn't just bureaucratic red tape. In my district, I'm literally seeing wildfire mitigation projects stalled, post-fire recovery efforts put on hold, local, state, and tribal partners left in limbo, uncertain whether the federal government will follow through on its commitment. This freeze is not just irresponsible, it is dangerous. Federal land management agencies were already struggling to hire the personnel that they needed to keep up with the increasing threat of wildfire and extreme weather and rising public land visitation. Now the administration has kneecapped their ability to function, throwing our public lands and the communities that depend on them into chaos. So we need answers. How many projects have been delayed or canceled at this point? How has this freeze impacted disaster recovery efforts? What are the long-term consequences for public safety, climate resilience, and resource management? That's what this amendment does. It ensures that this committee exercises real oversight of how IRA and IIJA funding has been implemented and how President Trump's funding freeze is actively jeopardizing these efforts. The American people deserve to know whether their tax dollars are being used to make communities safer or if critical investments are being held hostage for political games. This amendment makes clear that the committee has a responsibility to provide that oversight. I urge support and yield back.
The gentleman yields. Is there further discussion on this amendment? If no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 10. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. I recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Brownlee number 14. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On President Trump's first day in office, he issued an executive order declaring that the United States was in a national energy emergency. He, along with my colleagues across the aisle, claim that foundational environmental laws like the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act are stifling American energy production. Let's be clear. When they talk about energy production, they aren't talking about renewables or innovation. They mean fossil fuels. So let's look at the facts. How much oil and gas are we really producing in the United States? For the past 3 years, the Energy Information Administration has reported that the United States is producing more crude oil than any other nation at any other time in history. In 2023, our average crude oil production was 12.9 million barrels per day. And according to the EIA, no other country has even reached a production capacity of 13 million barrels per day. Despite that, the Republicans on this committee want to claim that we need to expand our domestic energy production, and this increased production is what is going to help American consumers at the gas pump and unleash American energy independence. Since we are here as an oversight body, I think we should put that theory to the test. It is our responsibility to ensure the policies we are proposing and the actions being taken by the administration are really helping American taxpayers and not just lining the pockets of big oil. We are not in an energy crisis. We are outpacing every other country, and we've done so while still complying with the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. These laws have been on the books for over 50 years. Since 1972 and 1973, oil and gas companies have been expected to follow basic protections for our most vulnerable species, yet they've still managed to set record-breaking production levels. But now President Trump has directed agencies to do as much as they can to waive these requirements and ignore impacts to endangered species for energy projects. Oil companies have reached record production and record profits while complying with these laws. Why would President Trump waive these requirements now? The answer is simple. It's not about an energy emergency. It's about profits. This is why I'm offering this amendment. This committee should investigate how fossil fuel companies stand to benefit from this so-called emergency authority. The American people deserve to know who really gains when environmental protections are stripped away, and it's certainly not them. I urge a yes vote on my amendment, and I yield back.
This gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. I believe this amendment misrepresents the purpose of the executive order, which simply aims to provide legal and regulatory relief to ensure the United States energy security. And, also, if we want to look at ESA and Marine Mammal Protection Act and protecting species, there was a 2013 study published in the Wildlife Society Bulletin about 573,000 birds that stated that 573,000 birds are killed by windmills every year. According to a study conducted by the Argonne National Laboratory, solar farms can contribute to as many as 138,000 bird deaths per year. This doesn't account for lost habitat that birds would otherwise have used for foraging or breeding, so the number could be much greater. Additionally, according to a study co-authored by ABC, more than 2,000 golden eagle deaths have been attributed to wind turbines. Thousands more are undocumented or not available to the public. For context, there are only about 31,800 golden eagles in North America, and they are on the decline. I do appreciate my colleague from California as we've worked together on other issues in the past, but I don't support this amendment, and I urge my colleagues not to support it. I yield back. Is there further discussions? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Brownlee, designated Brownlee number 14. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment will be postponed. Recognize the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Randall, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Randall number 16. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Oh, thank you.
Recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. You know, like many of us, my phone lines have been flooded recently by the constituents who sent me here to Congress to work on lowering costs and expanding access to healthcare and protecting their rights and civil liberties. You know, last week we received over 1,000 messages from concerned Washingtonians about the hostile takeover of our government, about the unelected billionaire that is working behind the scenes at so many of our agencies, and the threat that this poses to our democracy and to the people of our country. The threat to seniors relying on Meals on Wheels, to children and families that rely on Head Start childcare and early learning, rural communities that overwhelmingly count on Medicaid and Medicare for healthcare access, many low-income seniors who are dual eligible. Now you might be saying, why is she talking about this in the Natural Resources Committee? But I'm raising this issue because, as I mentioned before, I share a representation of the 6th District with the leaders of 12 sovereign nations. Washington State counts 29 federally recognized tribes within our borders, and there are over 500 federally recognized tribes across the country that are delivering Head Start services and healthcare access, not only to their enrolled tribal members, but often to community members in rural places like my own, where there are no other options for folks. I am here to elevate the voices of my constituents, to raise the issues that will be impactful to my neighbors. And this, I think, is a simple and should be bipartisan amendment. We have spoken respectfully about the issues affecting Indian country in this committee. It's clear that folks are interested in working together and in consultation with tribal nations to ensure that we are doing the best work on behalf of the people who live in the United States. I'm just asking that we make clear our commitment in our oversight authority to consult in these government-to-government relationships, to really codify our tribal consultation to ensure that we are doing that work in a meaningful way with respect to uphold our treaty and trust obligations. I urge this body's support of this amendment.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself, and I agree with the intent of the gentlelady. I do oppose the amendment because I believe it's unnecessary and duplicative of the work that all our committees, both Republican and Democrats, or all of our committee members, both Republicans and Democrats, are already doing. To back up that statement, I'll say that last Congress, we continued and expanded our efforts to highlight Native voices and work collaboratively with tribes and tribal organizations that bring issues before the committee. The committee had over 50 tribal witnesses testify last Congress across all our subcommittees. Each of them presented aspects of the multifaceted and complex opinions that tribes and individual Native Americans have within Indian country. Hearing stories from tribal leaders along with the challenge they face and the successes they've had highlights how important it is for Congress to continue to work to find solutions as we partner with all 574 federally recognized tribes. Have had the opportunity to visit several tribes in Washington State, and I can tell you that we can learn a lot from tribal members there, whether it's forest management or fisheries management, and work they're doing with Indian Health Services, lots of different things we can work on. And I say we're all better legislators when we're informed by tribal and non-tribal stakeholders alike. But again, the work of this committee speaks for itself. The Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs had 16 tribally focused hearings in the 118th Congress. These hearings covered issues ranging from public safety in Indian country, bolstering economic development, holding the Indian Health Services accountable, putting land into trust to benefit individual tribes, and improving burdensome bureaucratic policies that tribes and tribal members currently navigate. Of the 23 tribal bills our Indian and Insular Affairs Subcommittee had hearings on, 6 individual bills that benefited tribes were signed into law by the President last Congress. This committee largely supported these bills in a bipartisan manner. The committee has also done this for our insular partners. We held 10 insular hearings and invited 27 witnesses from the insular areas to present their views on legislation, the compacts of free association, and oversight topics. The committee also created an Indo-Pacific task force to ensure a timely renewal of the compacts of free association, following the request by the freely associated state governments and stakeholders, including holding a historic field hearing in Guam, following an invitation by leaders of the freely associated states and Guam. We will continue working on tribal and territorial partners this Congress, working on their issues, and we will further ensure that U.S. government works for all. I encourage everyone to take part in that, but also encourage everyone to oppose this amendment, as I believe it's unnecessary, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. McClintock, you're
I
recognized.
just can't let one comment pass by unresponded to. I wonder if the Democrats even listen to themselves and if there's any even modicum of self-reflection or self-awareness. This comment that we're watching a hostile takeover of our government, the hostile takeover of our government. Well, I've got news for you. That's called an election. The American people specifically chose this president to do exactly what he's doing, open the books and expose the atrocious waste that the Democrats have committed and defended for years and still defend right now as it's exposed to the public. Demos kratis, rule by the people. That's what democracy is. And if the Democrats actually believe that this is a hostile takeover of our government, well, then they're tacitly admitting that the government has been hostile to the people. And that's a conclusion the people came to last November, and according to the polls, a conclusion that is growing among the American electorate. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Self-reflection? Wow. I just heard a full-throated expression of the unitary executive theory from my colleague from California, basically that the president is CEO over the entire executive branch such that Congress cannot question anything he does. There is no way that my colleague or any of his colleagues across the aisle would have said anything like that when Joe Biden was president of the United States. There is just no way. I could write the speech for them. If Joe Biden had handed the keys to all federal agencies, to Bloomberg or to Gates or to George Soros and said, do whatever you want because I'm here now, I was elected, I can ignore laws, I can ignore Congress, I can impound funds and violate Article 1. There is no way we would hear this worship, this exaltation of the unitary executive if a Democrat were in the White House today, and everyone knows it. Now, to the amendment at hand. Mr. Chairman, I am confused because I heard you state that we can learn a lot from tribal nations, and you specifically mentioned the Indian Health Service. We should be talking to tribal nations right now about what's going on at the Indian Health Service. I have reached out to my tribes, and what I have heard is that Indian Health Service is in real trouble because of this funding freeze. They have been absolutely caught up in this dragnet of wokeness and DEI opposition. I don't know if the Trump administration and our Republican friends intended to shut down the Indian Health Service, but that's what's going on right now. And in very rural communities, like many of the ones I represent, and I'm sure that the same for my colleague from Washington, Indian health clinics are the only game in town. They don't just serve enrolled members of those tribes. They serve everyone for miles and miles around, and right now, they can't hire people, they can't get medicine, they can't pay for ambulances. Pretty much everything they do is stuck, and they are pretty quickly going to have to start laying people off and shutting down facilities. So, yeah, I think we do have a lot to learn from tribal nations, and specifically on the issue of the Indian Health Service. We should be talking to them right now, and if this amendment were simply passed by people who say they care about Indian country, we would be doing it as part of a serious oversight plan here at the Natural Resources Committee. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Mr. Gothar, you recognize.
Yes, I'd like to yield to my colleague from California, Mr.
I again can't pass up the opportunity to try once again to educate my colleague on the fundamental architecture of the Constitution, which he seems to be ignorant of. Article 2 of the Constitution establishes the presidency with these words: "The executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America." Not some of the executive power, all of it. Yes, it is subject to checks and balances, but the president alone is given the executive authority for the reasons that Hamilton stated in the Federalist Papers, that they wanted energy in the execution of the laws. They're getting it now, and they don't like it. I yield back.
I yield back.
Mr. Hernandez, you're recognized.
I yield my time to Ms. Randall.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I just want to take a moment to respond to two bits of testimony from my colleagues. First, to your point, Mr. Chair, you clearly have been invested in ensuring that we are working to listen from the leadership of tribal nations. When I was chair of just a state legislative committee, I always tried to have like a hit by a bus strategy. You know, if I was hit by a bus, if I couldn't come into committee, how would I make sure to leave direction to the colleague who stepped into my place? How would I ensure that like the plans that we had set out in committee were continued? And I would assume, knock on wood, that you don't get hit by a bus, but that I would assume that you would want to ensure that your colleagues continued to engage the tribal leadership of this country in a way that was true to your plans and that continued to work to ensure that we were consulting in our oversight capacity. So I would just plead again that we support this amendment. Also, to Mr. McClintock's point, and maybe I should have chosen my words a little bit more carefully, hostile takeover may not be the right language. But since we are in this committee and we have a responsibility over Indian and Insular Affairs, I want to point out that while our Vice President tweeted recently that if a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the Attorney General on how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. The last time that we saw a president flaunt the rule of the courts, the constitutional power of our court system, was when President Andrew Jackson forcibly expelled indigenous people from their usual and accustomed territories and their lands and saw the genocide of so many tribal nations. And I want us to think about that and be conscious of our work moving forward. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Webster, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just yield my time to Mr. Gozar.
I thank the gentleman from Florida. Once again, I think this is really rich. I'm sorry, I have to go and jump in here. Look what your party did to him in the courts. You absolutely flaunted the rule of law. Absolutely flaunted it. And guess what? He won every single time. So it tells me, something's wrong here. Now, I'm also a taxpayer, and I hope you are too, because every little bit of waste and stuff that they're finding ought to be found. I mean, think about this. We have spent over $12 trillion in national emergencies. We don't have a single receipt, not a single receipt on that. That is just absurd. We had a Secretary of Treasury saying, even though it's described that she has that oversight role, she refused to even look into it. So don't go talking to me about this president. I really tell you, I'm one of those people that really looks at checks and balances. And that's why I've got a national emergency that you can happily jump in on, that says, listen, President, as all can start a national emergency, but he has to have the conclusion with Congress in 30 days. That gives us back the power of the purse. And that the Secretary of Treasury has to answer those lines. So be careful where we're going here. I think I come from a very big family, and they're all like you. I can tell you, you're going down a road I don't think you want to go. I just don't think you want to go down there. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? There's no further discussion. The question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Randall, designated Randall number 16. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment will be postponed. I recognize the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Elfreth, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Elfreth number 17. Without objection, the amendment is considered read. Ms. Elfreth, is your microphone on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, thank you for this time. The amendment before you, colleagues, seeks to address a real challenge in my part of the country, the Chesapeake Bay, of invasive aquatic species that is wreaking havoc on the ecology of my state and region, but also rapidly approaching wreaking havoc on our economy. But invasive aquatic species impact every one of our districts. Mr. Chair, in Arkansas, the northern snakehead, which also impacts my state, in California and Arizona, the quagga mussel, in Colorado, the New Zealand mud snail, Maryland and Virginia. Our greatest challenge right now is the invasive blue catfish. And for folks not familiar, they are delicious, but they also can live up to 20 years. They can weigh up to 100 pounds, and they eat 9.4% of their body weight every single day. And lastly, and terrifyingly, they have no natural predator in the bay, which is resulting in the devastation of a number of our keystone species, including blue crabs, oysters, juvenile rockfish, which is our name for striped bass, all of which are essential to the economy and ecology of the Chesapeake Bay and my home state of Maryland. These particular invasive species are outnumbering and displacing native catfish. They are estimated to be a bay-wide population at this point of 100 million. And over the past 20 years, they have not just spread through the bay, they are also now in every major tidal river in Maryland and most of the Virginia rivers as well. So this amendment seeks to address what we are rapidly approaching as a crisis level in the Chesapeake Bay, of serving as the committee's commitment to investigating the impact of these particular invasive species, but also invasive aquatic species across this country, exploring strategies to mitigate them, and shape policy that is driven and targeted to ensuring that we protect native species critical to the economy and ecology and livelihoods of so many of our communities. I do want to take a moment and thank my colleagues from Virginia on this committee who are also very concerned about invasive blue catfish. And with that, I will yield the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself, and I support the amendment. And in case you didn't hear that correctly, Mr. Huffman, I support the amendment. The proposed amendment would add language to evaluate current authorities, regulations, and policies relating to aquatic invasive species. I want to thank Representative Elfreth for working with the committee staff on the proposed language. From giant apple snails, which impact the rice industry in Arkansas, to quagga mussels that clog water infrastructure in the West, aquatic invasive species not only negatively impact the ecosystems they invade, but they also are detrimental to the economy. For decades, a patchwork of federal and state laws have directed billions of dollars to address aquatic invasive species, yet the problem is costly and continues to spread. Clearly, we do need to evaluate these authorities. Last Congress, a provision supporting inspection and decontamination of aquatic invasive species in federal waters was included in the extremely bipartisan Explore Act that was signed into law in January. I look forward to continue the committee's good work on this issue in the 119th Congress. Again, I support the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? There's no further discussion on the amendment. The question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Elfreth, designated Elfreth number 17. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Any opinion of the chair? The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.
I will not request the yeas and nays on that.
Well, and the other thing I would say is we got to find something better looking than a squawfish, because the squawfish eats those quagga mussels. I don't know, the world record will come out of our state border right there. It's like, it's an ugly looking thing. Ugh. So anyway.
I recognize the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Hernandez, for the purpose of offering his amendment designated Hernandez number 18. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 9 years ago, Congress adopted PROMESA, a law that imposed an unelected financial oversight and management board over Puerto Rico that severely curtailed the island's autonomy and self-government. Now, this committee must enhance its oversight of the Financial Oversight and Management Board, and this amendment seeks to do just that on a key topic, the topic of energy. Recently, the board has been active against net metering and overriding local legislation in defense of net metering. I believe that this committee should exercise oversight over the board's transparency in its decision-making process, and this is something that has local bipartisan support, and this is something that my predecessor, Republican Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, supported. I also believe that we should exercise oversight over the board's management of the Puerto Rico Energy Power Authority bankruptcy litigation. This is something that will have repercussions over the island's economic stability, over the island's utility company, and something that many people in the island are watching closely. Mr. Chairman, I believe that this amendment should enjoy bipartisan support, and I urge everyone to support it because, for example, I, like you, agree that the island needs to stabilize its finances before it engages in any other sort of debate. So I respectfully urge all my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to support this amendment from the gentleman from Puerto Rico. So the PROMESA Oversight Board on December 16th, 2022, filed a third plan of adjustment to restructure more than $10 billion of debt and other claims of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, or PREPA. Filed that report with the U.S. District Court in Puerto Rico. And this third amended plan to end the bankruptcy of PREPA really provided a significant win for the people of Puerto Rico. It would reduce more than $10 billion of total asserted claims by various creditors against PREPA by almost 80%. That's the equivalent of $2.5 billion. The plan was a breakthrough because it offered a viable compromise that reflects Puerto Rico's financial reality, and the plan was affirmed by the district court. But the PREPA bondholders rejected the compromise, and they successfully appealed the district court's decision approving the plan, creating a circumstance that now could lead to years of protracted litigation. The refusal of the bondholders to accept the reality of PREPA's financial condition is holding back the transformation of Puerto Rico's energy system and the goal of providing the financial stability necessary to invest in a modern, resilient, and reliable energy system for the people of Puerto Rico. This committee should use its oversight authority to look into this, to find out why this final PROMESA authorized restructuring appears no closer to resolution 8 years later and counting. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Soto, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Soto, welcome back to the committee.
Oh, it's an honor to be back. And I rise in support of Resident Commissioner Hernandez's amendment and our ranking member as well. It's absolutely critical that we get a handle on the PROMESA board. They're there as a temporary time period for 4 budgets. And yet we see a hesitancy to certify budgets even though they've said that they comply. And it seems to me this is just going to go on and on and on. This is an unelected board that oversees an island of 3.2 million Americans. So whether it is using the oversight
to make sure that these deals that happen in the bankruptcy court are reviewed, whether it is making sure that Puerto Rico has reliable power because people are sick of the blackouts, or it's making sure we don't have a PROMESA board that goes into perpetuity. It's absolutely critical that we in the Natural Resources Committee with jurisdiction over Puerto Rico step up, and I support this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I do oppose the amendment, but I don't oppose the spirit of the amendment. I just believe that it's unnecessary and it would be duplicative of what is already contained in the A&O plan and the work that the committee has accomplished in previous Congresses. We will continue our oversight of the implementation of PROMESA and the ongoing efforts of the Oversight and Management Board of LUMA and PREPA to address energy issues on the island, which will remain a top priority for the Indian and Insular Affairs Subcommittee. I am committed to working with our partners in the insular areas to address the challenges they face and ensure that the U.S. government works for all Americans. Again, I oppose the amendment and I yield back. Is there further? Mr. McClintock, you're recognized.
Well, I just want to take the opportunity to say I told you so. PROMESA was a bad idea. We're responsible for it. I support this amendment. If it's duplicative of our current policy, well, then it does no harm. But I think it is important to restate our responsibility over the situation that was created by PROMESA years ago. And I support the amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Velasquez.
I want for the record to reflect the fact that I support Mr. Hernandez's amendment.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Mr. Hernandez, designated Hernandez number 18. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Okay, a recorded vote.
And a recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. Recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Velasquez number 20. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to propose an amendment to the committee's oversight plan to compel a comprehensive analysis and interpretation of the conditions established under PROMESA for the exit of the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico. The board has now been operating on the island for nearly 8 years, and yet setting a realistic timeline for its departure remains elusive. Even though PROMESA's Section 209 is brief, the board has chosen to interpret this section expansively, imposing up to 50 conditions that Puerto Rico must meet before the Financial Oversight Board leaves. These actions are detailed in the current fiscal plan, but were never explicitly required by Congress. This overreach underscores the urgency for congressional intervention. Only this committee holds the authority to supervise the board's functions, and it is our responsibility to scrutinize how the board has interpreted Section 209. Further, this committee should hold regular meetings where the board reports on the progress Puerto Rico is making regarding fiscal responsibility indicators. While the committee's oversight plan claims to support the implementation of PROMESA, this stance has effectively translated into indifference. The notion of letting the board do its job has served as a convenient excuse to avoid involvement and to refrain from passing judgment on the board's work or determining how long its presence should continue. The board increasingly integrates itself into the workings of the Puerto Rican government, while this committee remains silent. This lack of oversight undermines the very spirit of PROMESA and sends a troubling message about our commitment to Puerto Rico's fiscal future. My amendment calls for an end to this inaction. The committee's plan regarding implementation of PROMESA needs to be more specific, and this amendment will achieve precisely that. If there is any commitment to seeing Puerto Rico emerge from bankruptcy once and for all, We must act now. Mr. Chairman, for the purpose of my amendment, I would like to submit an article that highlights the board expenses in consultants and advisors since the enactment of PROMESA.
Without
And I have it
objection,
right here. Thank you.
So
And I
ordered.
yield back.
the gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Could the gentlelady elaborate on
Yeah.
her last?
Mr. McClintock,
Could the
you wish to be
gentlelady-
recognized?
Yes,
All
thank
right.
you. Could the gentlelady elaborate on her last point regarding opening the books?
Pardon?
Could you elaborate on your vision that this will require a more fuller examination and opening the books?
The people of Puerto Rico needs transparency.
Yes.
And the oversight board has not been transparent.
I couldn't agree with you more.
And they incurred in billions of dollars in expenses. The
Yeah.
people of Puerto Rico are paying for that. They deserve to know.
I agree with you
And
completely.
we need to have a timeline. Otherwise, they're going to be there, 50 years, and claiming that the government has not produced any balanced budget.
I'm in complete agreement with you on that, and just want to point out that what you're asking us to do for Puerto Rico is exactly what Elon Musk and Doge is doing for the rest of the country. I strongly support the amendment and urge its adoption.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Hernandez, you're recognized.
I also want to state for the record my unequivocal support for this amendment. I believe that we need clarity and we need to exercise oversight on the board's termination. I think it's a necessary step to restore Puerto Rico's autonomy, self-government, and democracy. So I urge all my colleagues to support this amendment as well. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. Again, I don't oppose the intent of the amendment, but I oppose the amendment because I believe it's unnecessary. Again, we're talking about the authorization and oversight plan and the work of the committee that is accomplished in the previous Congress. And we will continue to have oversight of PROMESA, and that also includes Section 209 of the Act.
Mr.
because
Chairman,
the,
May I ask you a question?
hold on just a second. If we, the committee A&O plan specifically addresses the need to conduct oversight on the implementation of PROMESA, and we will have oversight over the implementation of that, which again does include Section 209. And Ms. Velasquez, I'll yield.
So my question is, why is it so difficult for this committee to set up a time period for the board to cease its function? The people of Puerto Rico, because that way they will feel the responsibility to do their job. And right now, the people of Puerto Rico are just tired.
Ms. Velasquez, I would say that's a valid argument to make during a hearing. Again, we're talking about the plan for authorization and oversight, not specific issues as we look at these today. I oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ms. Velasquez, designated Velasquez number 20. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is.
Could we request a recorded vote?
A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. We've gone through all of our amendments. We're going to take a recess, subject to the call of the chair. The plan is to be back here in about 5 or 6 minutes at 1 p.m. To do the votes. I will remind everybody there's still food for all the members back in the committee offices if you would like to step back there. The committee is in recess. The committee will come to order. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on H.R. 302 as amended. Members will record their votes using the electronic voting system. The clerk will open the vote. The voting machine is warming up.
Yep. Come on. This first one always, there we go. Thank you.
Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 22 and the nays are 16.
The bill as amended is ordered reported to the House with the recommendation that it be favorably approved. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Chair, I give notice of my intention to file supplemental, additional, dissenting, or minority views on the measures just considered. I ask unanimous consent that this notice be extended to all measures considered at this markup. Under House Rule 11, Clause 2L, this notice extends to all members.
Without objection, so ordered. The unfinished business is on the request for recorded votes on amendments to the committee authorization and oversight plan. Members will record their votes using the electronic voting system. The question is on the amendment designated Hoyle number 1, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Hoyle number 2, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Hoyle number 3, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Dexter number 4, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Dexter number 5, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated men number 6, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Huffman number 7, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Huffman number 8, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Ansari number 13, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Neguse number 11, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Neguse number 12, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Neguse number 15, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Huffman number 9, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Huffman number 10, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Brownlee number 14, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Randall number 16, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 16 and the nays are 23.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Hernandez number 18, on which noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 17 and the nays are 22.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Velazquez number 20, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 18 and the nays are 21.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on approval of the authorization and oversight plan as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the plan as amended is approved. A recorded vote has been requested. Members will record their vote using the electronic voting system. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 23 and the nays are 16.
The committee authorization and oversight plan as amended is approved. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. We will now turn to the UC package, but I'd also like to make the full committee aware that we're having our first field hearing in Oklahoma City in early April, so we would love to see everybody there to participate in that field hearing. Will be the Indian and Insular Affairs Subcommittee, where we will talk about Indian health and economic development and security and safety. Now to the UC package. With the cooperation of Ranking Member Huffman and the other members of the committee, it appears that we have worked out an agreement on 7 bills scheduled for markup today. As we have done before, rather than going through a formal markup process for each of these bills, I will make a single unanimous consent motion to report out the bills favorably with any amendments that have been filed and agreed to. Before we begin, does any member seek time to speak on any of the bills in this unanimous consent motion? Before we wrap up today, I want to recognize the slate of bills we've worked with the minority to advance under unanimous consent. We have 3 bills from our Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries. H.R. 231, sponsored by Ms. Hageman, extends funding for the System Conservation Pilot Program on the Upper Colorado River Basin. This pilot program helps the Upper Basin conserve water, addressing declining water levels across the system. H.R. 331, sponsored by Mr. Fulcher, amends the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act to allow an entity that holds an existing right-of-way to utilize it for aquifer recharge without further authorization from the Secretary of the Interior. Additionally, we have 4 bills from our Subcommittee on Federal Lands. H.R. 1001, sponsored by Ms. Hageman, directs the Bureau of Reclamation and the Western Area Power Administration to enter into a memorandum of understanding to address potential impacts associated with the record of decision allowing for flow experiments at Glen Canyon Dam. H.R. 1044, sponsored by Representative Valadeo, will allow a utility company in California to continue supplying reliable and affordable energy to surrounding communities. For over 100 years, Southern California Edison has operated a hydroelectric project in Tulare County. In 1943, Sequoia National Park was expanded to acquire lands that include portions of the project. Following the expansion, Congress has allowed the company to operate the project under a special use permit. Congressman Valadeo's bill extends this permit for 40 years, allowing the region to continue receiving safe, affordable energy. Similarly, Representative LaMalfa's bipartisan legislation, H.R. 1110, directs federal land managers to expand the use of proactive, targeted grazing and fuels management programs to lower fire risk. During times of drought and post-fire recovery, grazing is a dynamic fuels management tool that protects vulnerable communities. This legislation will ensure land management agencies are utilizing a proven fuels management practice that reduces both the speed and severity of wildfires. This bill was included in the Fix Our Forest Act, and I'm pleased that we're advancing it today. H.R. 618, led by Representative Horsford, streamlines the permitting process for installing utility and transportation infrastructure at the Apex Industrial Park in Clark County, Nevada. This common-sense legislation will streamline permitting for growing businesses in North Las Vegas, bringing much-needed economic growth to this community. Finally, H.R. 249, led by Representative Pallone, would rename 2 sites at the Paterson Great Falls National Historical Park in honor of the late Congressman Bill Pascrell, Jr., a 14-term congressman who passed away last August. Representative Pascrell helped secure the designation of Paterson Great Falls as a National Historic Park in 2009. I am pleased to see so many local priorities advanced today, and I'd like to thank the members and staff on both sides of the aisle who worked together to reach a bipartisan consensus on these bills. I support these bills, and I yield back. Ask unanimous consent that the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 231, Colorado River Basin System Conservation Extension Act of 2025, H.R. 331 to amend the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act to clarify a provision relating to conveyances for aquifer recharge purposes. Without objection, so ordered. Ask unanimous consent that the following measures be approved and favorably reported as described to the House of Representatives. H.R. 231, Colorado River Basin System Conservation Extension Act of 2025, with an amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crank, designated Crank number 1. H.R. 249 to redesignate certain facilities at Paterson Great Falls National Historical Park in honor of Congressman Bill Pascrell, Jr. H.R. 331 to amend the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act to clarify a provision relating to conveyances for aquifer recharge purposes, with an amendment offered by the chair, designated Westerman number 1. H.R. 618 to amend the Apex Project Nevada Land Transfer and Authorization Act of 1989 to include the City of North Las Vegas and the Apex Industrial Park Owners Association and for other purposes, with an amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, designated Neguse number 1. H.R. 1001 to provide for a memorandum of understanding to address the impacts of a certain record of decision on the Upper Colorado River Basin Fund. H.R. 1044 to amend Public Law 99-338 with respect to Cahuilla project permits, and H.R. 1110 Grazing for Wildfire Risk Reduction Act with an amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, designated LaMalfa A&S. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the motions to reconsider are laid upon the table. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make any technical and conforming changes to the documents the committee just adopted, subject to the approval of the minority. Without objection, so ordered. If there is no further business, the committee stands adjourned.